Joan DeAngelis, our Director of People Personnel Services, Sue Chi, our Technology Manager, Lisa Gobecki, Director of Health, Wellness, and Safety, and Marie Stoika, Director of Human Resources.
And Mr. Chairman, do you want to share your screen?
It should be projected.
Amy, can you see the presentation through Zoom? Can you best?
No, I don't see the presentation, no.
It would have at home, I'm not quite sure.
Just for, she's using the Zoom as the stream.
Right. So on this.
Oh, because you're not in the Zoom. I can do it. Well, so
Yeah, actually you could. You could just share your screen. You will just need to manage the slide deck as I'm talking about here. So as long as we're syncopated
promise to
in that
stay
way,
fully
we'll be in
engaged.
good shape.
All right, so everybody, I'm going to just share my screen so that you can see the presentation through the Zoom, or you can look at it on your own. It's up to you. But just give me 1 second, and Kirk's going to keep going.
Great. I also wanted to take a moment to introduce some important people in the crafting of our budget, because our cabinet team, while we collectively work together in our weekly meetings and throughout the week on all things that are important to the district, our principals and our athletic director were instrumental in helping craft a responsible budget that meets our goals and objectives that are stated in the strategic plan. So those principals are Joel Bates of the Florence Sawyer School, Kyle Grady of Hale Middle School, Shelley Dulski of Center Elementary, Sean O'Shea, Mary Rowlandson Elementary, Sean O'Shea also of Luther Burbank Middle School, and Dr. Kathleen Boynton, our principal at Nashoba Regional High School. And a special shout out to Tanya Rich, our athletic director, who oversees athletics at both the high school and our middle schools. So this is going to be a theme you see tonight. In crafting the budget, we want to lay out for you in terms of what are we buying in the school system in terms of human capital, in that human capital as it relates to the various sectors of the organization. So this is a flow chart, an organizational chart of the people I just introduced you to show our leadership team. That is our cabinet team and our principals. In the presentation tonight, we're going to go through the strategic plan a little bit and just talk about what are some of the core components there. I also want to describe what equality, equity, and standards in school budgets looks like. We'll talk about the drivers, the school-based budgets, and the department budgets. And then we'll look at, on the back half, those preliminary FY24 revenues, how foundation enrollment equates, and where we sit currently with town assessments. I think this is important, our mission here in the Nashoba Regional School District, and that as we gather to redefine what our mission is, collectively, a group of people, residents, educators, staff members, students, town officials, we came to this place of together we inspire and challenge all learners to realize their unique potential and become active contributors to their community. This is our purpose and our function in the school system. This is what we do the work for, is to fulfill the mission to ensure our students get our best. And in that, we have a vision. This vision is what we have for all members of our organization. And that vision is we'll be able to execute that mission if you can be your best self, pave your path to impact the world. This is what we see for all of us in the organization, particularly our students for whom we are here to serve. Built into this, if you will, sort of baked into the strategic plan is our core values. And the core values are based in what we see are the most important values that are going to support the learning organization. We believe in we value academic achievement and personal growth. That our students have voice, choice, and agency, and our employees. Lifelong learning, a self-caring and inclusive community, collaborative partnerships, to be innovative, and most importantly, to have a sense of belonging for all. That is critical to the values of this school system. So as we take those key components of our mission, what it is we are here for, our purpose, with our vision, what we see for our student, combined with the essence of our core values, we come to our theory of action. And our theory of action is that piece that says, if we do this, then we get that. So through communication systems and protocols, clearly aligned and articulated curricula, innovative practices, shared leadership, equitable opportunities and outcomes for all, and effective resource allocation, we will inspire and challenge all learners to realize their unique potential in becoming active contributors of their community. So the theory of action is what makes the mission come to life. So tonight's budget, you're going to see straight lines through the strategic plan and how we have executed some of the decisions in planning this year's budget as we prioritized last year in our strategic planning sessions that was voted unanimously by our school committee last June. So before we get into those elements, I want to talk a little bit about the notion of equality and equity in regards to crafting a budget. And I'm using those words in this sense. There are places where we want to be equal in our budgets in generalized ways. So for instance, we look at administration needs as a principal slash assistant principal for approximately 250 students. And we also look at this per town. Guidance counselor, 250, and that comes from as a recommendation out of the National Council. We value 1 dean per 800 students per town or school, being that our high school is regionalized. And then in regards to our class sizes, it was memorialized through actually school of choice vote that was taken in 2010 by this committee. I think prior to any of the current members being on, that we aim to have class sizes start at the beginning of the year at or below the number of 24 to 1, with our classrooms in kindergarten, first grade, and second grade being at a ratio of 22 to 1. So that's where, in looking at the budget this year and making some of the adjustments that we've made in this proposed budget, we are using those equality standards so that we can say we're staffing our schools fairly across all 3 towns and our high school according to these standards. Equity really can be defined in simple ways as getting what you need. So there is staffing within each of the school budgets and the district budget that speaks to that. And it comes in the form of several places. Specialized programming for students on IEPs. That staffing is supplied as it's dictated through federal requirements of providing educational services to students. And that can vary from town to town, school to school. So having a direct through line from school to school is not an equivocation we would ask anybody to make, because it is student-based and student-centered. You can say that same for supports of students that have IEPs and 504 plans. It is true also of our English learners, and you'll see some examples of that, where we've had really some decline actually in one of our towns of students needing English services. And then we also look at our multi-tiered systems of support. This is going to be a big theme throughout the night as we see. In the multi-tiered systems of support, we should be distributing our staffing in ways that shows where's the greatest need and who do we deploy to go meet that need where it lies. So those are the types of things you're going to see as we go through this, and it lays out and articulates our priorities. It's at this point I would like to turn it over to our business and operations manager, Mr. Ross Mulcairn, to speak to the overall budget drivers in this presentation.
Thank you, and thank you to the school committee for the opportunity to present our first iteration of the FY24 budget as we work to fulfill our mission as a school district. I'd also like to thank Superintendent Downing and Assistant Superintendent Friend, along with Renan Ansusao from our business office. I'd like to also thank our HR department including Anne Marie Stoika, Vicky Chartier, and Darcy Wardwell, as our salary and benefits are such an important part of our budget building. Also, thanks to our principals and department directors for their input to this initial budget. I also owe a debt of gratitude to Pat Maroney for her tutelage and mentoring over the summer and into the beginning of the school year prior to her retirement from this position. So I'd like to begin with the big picture. Our proposed FY24 budget, as it stands today, is projected to be $65,532,703, representing a 5.31% overall increase from FY23. As we move through the presentation tonight, we'll see more specifically to what makes up the overall FY24 budget. However, on this slide, you can see the standing drivers that are presented each year and what the increased impacts are moving into FY24. As an annual percentage increase of our total budget, you can see in the bottom orange line that we are at that 5.31%. We also have a historical look at increases that were voted. Again, today we're just looking at the projected and the proposed, but you can see historically what the voted increases have been year to year from FY18 moving forward to today. Superintendent Downing spoke to the per pupil non-salary expenditures methodology. For FY23, the district began the practice of assigning per pupil expenditures to several of our K through 8 school-based budget lines. We've continued this practice for FY24. Notable to FY24, we provided a base of $2,500 to each of our K to 8 buildings for professional development, due to the fact that a large portion of our professional development will occur out of the teaching and learning department budget, which Assistant Superintendent Friend will provide in detail in a few moments. And our high school calculated their professional development needs based on information they received from their departments. Again, this is all aligned to the strategic plan as Mrs. Friend and her team from Teaching and Learning presented on their curriculum review cycle a few meetings ago. So here are the standards that we've used this year. Some are similar to last year. We made maybe some slight changes, but just for your information, we have our FY24 K to 5 and then our FY 6 to 8. Obviously, in some of the areas such as art, students at the middle schools go through a little bit more of the more expensive supplies. We get into clay and pottery, et cetera, just as an example as why there's an increase in supplies per pupil between our K to 5 and our 6 to 8 buildings.
Okay, so provided that context, I'm actually going to come back to this slide for just a moment, our annual percentage increase in total budget, because I think there's some context to tell here. We know the first presentation of the budget of the school year comes without many factors, and many factors being unknown at this point in time. Last year, when we presented the budget to you at the first run, the average overall increase of the total budget sat at 7.27%. You can see this year it's at 5.31%. And I'm expressing that to you to show how thoroughly we have gone through our budget this year. And you're going to see that story told as we go through each of the slides at each of the locations in our school district. So let's begin with Center School. You're going to see some repeats of the strategic initiatives that are cited across. So I will save the committee's time here and not repeat them at each slide because there's a lot of redundancies. But we wanted to tie them to each school so that you could see it in their organizational charts that will be provided to you here. So looking at growing our professional learning communities, looking at our district-wide instructional coaching model, creating and developing multi-tiered systems of support, and our distributed leadership plan can all be seen in the staffing adjustments we're proposing. As well, we look to the targeted review provided by DESE this last year. In that targeted review, it was cited multiple times for the district to look carefully and thoroughly at developing the multi-tiered systems of support to help students who are struggling to meet grade level standards. This is critically important coming out of a pandemic when students might be farther down the timeline in achieving the benchmark skills we want them to achieve. Notice I didn't say learning loss, because to lose something, you would have had to have gained it first. But what we're trying to do is accelerate the timeline for those students that may not be at the same benchmark point as students in previous classes prior to the pandemic. We do that through multi-tiered systems of support, where they can be provided targeted instruction to meet their skill deficits. So let's get into it. As we look here, there's a flow chart, and I have to apologize to the committee right now. You would see I say to click on the chart to view and enlarge. And I did that, and I made the files public, and there was something corrupt about my link, so I'm not going to show it. I will correct it so that you're able to do that. But as a safeguard, all the changes that you see in these color codes are reflected down the left. And that's true for all the slides that you'll see. So beginning with the principal at Center School and assistant principal, we have executive assistants of 1.0 FTE. Note the nurses box is coded yellow because nurses are reflected in a different budget other than the Center School budget. So when you look at the breakdown on the workbook that's provided to you, nurses are not included in the FTE of the Center School budget. Also look at the purple boxes. The purple boxes are special education services. Those are reflected in the pupil personnel services budget, and they're not reflected in the FTE of the Center School budget. Budgeting is done that way as is required, but also demonstrates how we have to be fluid based upon what student need is. So in that way, the green means there's an increase in FTE in a given area, and red indicates there's a decrease in FTE. So at the Center School, there are changes at the grade levels in terms of their enrollment at that grade level. So as classes rise, sections may change, increase or decrease. So you will see first grade is a decrease, second grade is an increase, fourth grade is a decrease, fifth grade is an increase, right? And then also note, there's a kindergarten IA of 1.0 that is a decrease because that one position was shifted into the PPS budget, pupil personnel services. Strategic changes. So when we look at the changes due to enrollment, that's part of the equal standards I was speaking of before, that is school by school, that we want to be consistent in our towns. The strategic changes connect us to what we're doing with exploring our coaching model, our leadership model, as well as leaders in our MTSS model and examining student learning to make targeted instructional decisions. So in that way, currently Center has a math specialist that will be redefined and reimagined as a K-8 math coach for both the Center School and Hale School. So in terms of the budget book, it's a reduction in FTE of 0.4 because that 0.4 is being utilized next door at the Hale School. But we wanted to make sure that that position was partitioned that way so that the budget book accurately reflects where the FTE is being executed. That is also true of the Center Literacy Specialist. We had a 0.5 position there that with a 1.0 increase, 1/10 increase equals also that 0.6 position. So you would see the literacy coach and the math coach are both 0.6 at the Center School, 0.4 at Hale Middle School. So what does this mean overall? In year-over-year change from the FY23 budget to the FY24 budget, Center School will have a unit A decrease of 0.3 of an FTE. FTE is a full-time equivalent. And the net change in a unit C, which is our kindergarten instructional assistant that shifted into the PPS budget, of 1.0. So as we move along, Mr. Markaren can reflect what I shared with you through the budget table.
So our executive summary of the budget table for each building obviously is comprised of our salaries and our extracurricular, which is our stipended positions. Mrs. Delsky has put in for quite a few additional, which I think is a great move for the students at the center school. So you can see that reflected. Also under regular assistance, you'll see that decrease of 17% approximately. That is speaking to what Superintendent Downing just said. We had an IA position where the person moved from kindergarten into a special education IA position, and just the coding within the system did not follow. So that's now been corrected and is not necessarily reflected for the presented FY23, but is now reflected in the proposed FY24. So that's why you're seeing that change. With regards to the remainder of the non-salary budget lines, you'll see that the per pupil information is reflected. A couple of things to note, the instructional technology and the professional development is now largely housed in the teaching and learning budget to support the strategic plan. With regards to contracted services, each building will be unique. Mrs. Delsky didn't ask for anything different. I just want to point out that is one line where you see things that may be unique along with 504 compliance due to student needs that vary between building to building.
So I'll continue to go through the schools in this way, and I just encourage the committee members that if you see something specific to the town you serve, to record your questions, and we'll take all questions at the end. And perhaps, Madam Chair, when we take questions, we can go back sort of town by town so that we're sort of controlled in the presentation slides. So looking at Mary Rowlandson Elementary School, you'll see the strategic initiatives what we're trying to leverage are the same as the center school. And the way this plays out is a story to tell to the committee. If you recall last year, when we were in the budget season, we talked about sort of that precarious line we were in the Lancaster schools in terms of FTE, particularly for kindergarten. And so those remained in the budget. Those are positions we did not fill this year. And so what's important for our taxpayers to know is we didn't redirect those funds to other positions. Rather, that is what you see in the operations reports that are supplied monthly to the Budget and Warrant Subcommittee that shows those overages, and they've been discussing that within the budget, the contents of the Budget and Warrant Committee. So in this way, the decrease in those sections is being reflected in the budget today because it's a change in what the voted budget was last year, not a change in boots on the ground currently at the moment. And I am happy to return to that if more clarity is needed. So when you calculate for those sections, you can see kindergarten, first grade, and fifth grade all decrease a section. What I will say to you is, well, Mr. Downing, shouldn't we keep kindergarten at 4.0, similar to what we did last year for the residents of Lancaster? And the fact of the matter is, in conversations we've had with the leadership in Lancaster, kindergarten enrollments are down significantly this year relative to past years. That currently, after calls from the census data and bringing the residents to school to register, we are right now at 2 sections of kindergarten for next year, nearing the threshold to have a 3rd section. So I'm very confident we will have 3 sections. It would take a significant increase, upwards of 25 students to come to us to warrant a 4th section. We have never had any type of surge of that magnitude in Lancaster before. Something we'll continue to monitor, but our leadership in Lancaster has shared with us, they feel confident that with the budget at this time, we can move forward projecting 3 sections of kindergarten. So you'll see the strategic changes for the math specialist and literacy specialist are also reflected in MRE, so I won't repeat those pieces. And then there's a piece here that is labeled account adjustment. I want to take a moment to thank Mr. Mulcairn, Mr. Asenkow, for really looking deeply at where every 10th of FTE in this district is being paid. Because there was a time in which technical ed was offered in our elementary schools, and so a portion of that salary was reflected in the middle schools. The tech ed positions are now only reflected in the middle school budgets, so that 2/10 that was identified for tech ed now lives in the middle school budget entirely. So that's why you see a count adjustment there. And when you total up the increases and decreases in staffing and leveraging our strategic work, you can see the net is a decrease in Unit A staffing of 3 positions at Mary Rowlandson in the Unit A teacher sector and 1 position in the Unit C classroom assistant position. Mr. Mulcahy?
Thank you. So relative to the changes in salaries that Superintendent Downing just spoke of with regards to strategic plan changes, but also due to some of those enrollment things that were not reflected in the voted FY23 budget, they are now reflected in the proposed FY24 budget. Not much to say moving through the non-salaries. However, I do want to point out that I do notice that there's an error on the general instructional supplies. That figure should actually be, I believe, 23,700, making that increase much more minimal from FY23 to propose today. So we'll correct that on our budget. Beyond that, again, just a 504 contracted services are the things that they're having input towards, but the remainder of it is largely based on our per pupil figures.
Shifting now into Hale Middle School. You can see we want to continue to leverage some of the same strategic objectives and professional learning communities, our coaching model, and our multi-tiered systems of support. I also want to tease out here how we're looking at social emotional best practices in the daily instruction and student life in our middle schools, as well as that distributed leadership plan we've talked about in so many meetings this year. What's especially important to talk about in the targeted review report is, in addition to looking at multi-tiered systems of support, our targeted report pointed that district leadership continue to allocate resources to support social emotional learning and student well-being where they are needed most, including training for educators to further develop skills in these areas. So as there have been questions in the past regarding the high school dean position that has been paid out of ESSER funds, this language is speaking directly to that. It is allocating resources to support students in the student life and provide social emotional supports, and also to do the daily operational things that need to be done to free up the people who are highly skilled in that area to work with our students who need it most. This is particularly important coming out of the pandemic, where we know reintegration into school life again has been difficult for many students as they develop habits and skills that have been very difficult to break over time. And so earlier this year, you saw in our attendance rates, our school avoidance rates are down. That's a good thing. We are not at pre-pandemic levels, and we need to continue to work to do so. So in that way, when we look at Hale Middle School, you can see that we are asking to add a dean position at Hale Middle School. And in doing that, we also look at our class size standards and recognize that Hale having 5 sections at grade 6 and grade 7 was in excess to what our standards are in the towns of Bolton and in the towns of Lancaster. So we think it's important to come back to these standards to make sure all of our towns are in equal balance in terms of what FTE we are giving to class sizes. No, we are still keeping all of our class sizes under at or under the 24 threshold. I believe they're all under the 24 threshold at this point, with maybe a section or two touching the 24 threshold. In addition, you'll see an English learner decrease of 0.2 with a 0.2 move to center. That is one of those adjustments, like I mentioned before, where a position at one point in time was shared between the two, and then there was an increase of 0.6 EL provided to Hale School. The EL teacher at Center School has been functioning at 100% of her time at Center School. So we're returning that 0.2 back to the center school budget. So that is reflected accurately. But the reason why we have the 0.6 decrease is we simply do not have students with EL plans at Hale School and Stowe. The students that have been in that program have advanced through that program and have reached monitor status. And we believe that we can service their needs of being on monitor status through the staffing that we have, through our educators at center, but also through our coordinator at the high school. So when we look at some of the strategic changes, I mentioned the dean position is addressing the student life and some of the social emotional supports that were cited in the district targeted review. But it would reflect a decrease in administrative staffing at Hale School. Currently, we have a 0.6 assistant principal at that school who is a retired administrator that is moving into second retirement. So this is the opportunity to take in order for us to make the moves that we'd like to make now. You'll also see how the math and literacy specialist redesigns into coaches impact the Hale School. So when you net out the changes in the Unit A FTE at Hale School, the way it's related in the budget book, there's a decrease of 1.0 in staffing from FY23 to FY24, and there's a net decrease in administration of 0.6 FTE. Mr. McCarron.
So again, our first pass at looking through the salaries at the top, you can see the addition of the dean and the decrease of the assistant principal. Moving through the teacher salaries, I know that I brought this up at budget and warrant. This is one of those cases in the district where we've had several new teachers join the staff. And so the voted budget included either those staff that transitioned to a different district or moved or retired. And the differential in the salary is largely built up from that phenomenon. Moving through the remainder of the budget, a couple of things I want to point out. I don't want to reiterate the per pupil expenditures, but if you look under 504 compliance, there's an increase of about $9,600, and that's due to the addition of an FM system that's necessary for a student. Sometimes we have buildings where they have them already from prior students. Mr. Grady needs a new system for a student coming to the building next year. I also want to point out the instructional technology line. In looking at our previous expenditures, this is a line that's been underspent. So between that and some shifting with our teaching and learning instructional technology budget, we're not looking at a change in student experience relative to software applications, licenses that are being used. It's really just basing some projections off of actuals over the last couple of years and the shifting of some instructional technology licenses to teaching and learning for a more district-wide experience for our students in middle school.
Thank you, Mr. McCarron. Let's turn our attention now to Luther Burbank Middle School. Much like Hale Middle School, you'll see the same strategic initiatives cited as rationale, as well as the same points from the targeted review. The way that translates into staffing adjustments and shifts in strategy are thus: the assistant principal that is voted in last year's budget would be reduced to 1.0. Now, I want to re-educate the community on the moves that we made after the vote of the budget last year. So when the budget was voted last year, we had one principal and one assistant principal at Luther Burbank. What is happening in reality right now is we have Ms. Friend, who is our assistant superintendent of teaching and learning in the central office, with Ms. Roche serving as principal of 2 locations with a dean position there this year. This was the position that piloted for us the concept of how effective the dean can be in helping students and staff with all those things related to student life and daily activity that are critically important. I'm here to report to you that we have heard back from the faculty and staff, and we've heard back from the administration in Lancaster that that model is working extremely well. And that having a dean in the school that is solely dedicated to responding to where the student need is at the moment that it's needed has been critically important to helping the students and staff. And it's resulted in fewer referrals to the office. And it's resulted in fewer investigations, fewer situations. So we've been going through a test case that I will admit is steeped much in narrative. But also when our principals offer up their State of the Union reports this summer, we will see that actualized in the actual reporting of that data. And as we report that data to the state as well. So I digress a little bit, but I'll come back. In this year's budget then, the way that would look is we would be reducing from budget to budget an assistant principal from Luther Burbank with the addition of a dean. The math specialist and literacy specialist coaching, reimagining for coaching is reflected the same at Luther Burbank as well. And then you can see some account adjustments that are cited here. Now I'm going to take a moment just to explain this a little bit. In our middle school level, we have some students that have some language-based deficits that require targeted instruction, that are specialized instruction, that are cited in individual education plans. And so to reflect that accurately in the budget, we took a portion of that literacy specialist position that was already there at Luther Burbank and coded it 0.5 special education. So it's reflected in the pupil personnel services budget, while leaving the other portion to supplement the coaching model that is going to be happening there. You can also see where the tech ed 2/10 is then reflected over into the Luther Burbank budget. So when you look at the change in FTE in the budget document you all received from FY23 to FY24, you will see an increase of 1.0 FTE and a net change in administration that's a decrease of 1.0 FTE. There's another piece in your workbooks that I want to cite out for you. If committee members, you have your workbooks out. Our dean positions are Unit A positions within the teachers bargaining unit. We recognize and we acknowledge that they do serve in administrative roles. They serve in some instructional roles as through things like advisory and other means, but in administrative roles as well. So it's been separated out so your eyes can see where that dean position lies. And that's why it's not included in administration salaries, because we wanted your eyes to see that marker clearly in how the spreadsheet was organized. Mr. McCann.
So relative to what Superintendent Downing just shared with regards to administrative staff, this represents the decrease of the assistant principal. Then it shows the increase of the dean position moving forward into FY24. And then moving down, you can see the updates relative to per pupil expenditures and anything that is requested through contracted services or 504 compliance and moving forward.
Turning now to Florence Sawyer School. Florence Sawyer School is our only K-8 school in the school system. So it functions a little bit differently in terms of the budget. And I'm happy to say in terms of the math, a little bit simpler. So that's good for us. As we look, you can see the common strategic initiatives, as well as the elements out of the targeted review that are being leveraged through this, the priorities in the budget this year. So the way this position would look is you can see there's some changes in enrollment. I would like to note the second grade currently has 5 sections at Florence Sawyer. They'll be moving to third grade. So as we look at the FTE, they've crossed that threshold of being a 22-to-1 ratio to now being a 24-to-1 ratio, which is what necessitates that. And I'll come back to the end about total FTE and as it relates to teachers and their actual jobs, if you will. You'll see the 1.0 dean increase, but I really want your eyes to gravitate towards the guidance counselor 1.0 increase that is being shifted away from Nashoba Regional High School to Florence Sawyer School. Harkening back to earlier in the presentation, when I spoke about the counseling loads of being approximately, the goal is to look at a target around 250 to 1 students, and looking at what the needs were. There was a time when we needed the counselors that we have at the high school, but due to some declining enrollment over the years, we saw that Florence Sawyer was not being supported in the guidance arena the way our other schools were. And so Florence Sawyer was up around 370 to 1 for guidance staffing. And by shifting that guidance position from the high school to Florence Sawyer School, we come into our sort of our self-imposed range of acceptance in terms of guidance staffing. So at Florence Sawyer, which we have recognized has targeted need that we have to address. So there's equality and equity being addressed with these moves for Florence Sawyer School. And it's to address the students, student life components, the code of conduct, supporting students in distress, also helping them problem solve and anticipate situations, both through the position of the dean and the position of the guidance counselor that would be shifted. As we move through, you can see the math and literacy specialists as well. And then I'll point to a decrease in technology of 1.0. But I want you to note, in that red box, it says technology 1.0. Florence Sawyer will continue to have an instructional technology specialist as they currently have. That's not changing at all. It will remain the same. The position that is being reduced here is a position that works with both. It's coded in the budget for Florence Sawyer School, but it's a position that serves both the town of Lancaster, the town of Bolton, or any teacher that may request or need some guidance in that position. And so as we looked at that, we looked at our strategic priorities and what the future would look like for our Director of Innovation and Digital Learning. And we look at our equity balance of where our staffing is. We felt it was prudent that we could reduce that position, look to, as Ms. Friend will discuss shortly, funding our Innovation and Digital Learning Director. So that team together can collectively galvanize around what is our future strategy for building digital learning and innovation schools in our students moving forward. To get to that place, we have to set the table first. And so this is reflecting our initial moves, just the beginning of how we are reimagining digital learning and innovation within the classroom. I will move that there is an account adjustment as well for Florence Sawyer School. There was a 0.6 IA in last year's budget that has been shifted again into the pupil personnel services budget. That shift is because that IA actually works with students on IEPs. So by shifting it to the budget, you're reflecting what the employee does, boots on the ground. So as we look at the net changes of Florence Sawyer School, you would see that the net change in Unit A FTE is actually 0. And the net change in Unit C FTE is a reduction of 0.6 of a position. Mr. McCarron.
So relative to the executive summary of the budget for Florence Sawyer School, you see the addition of the dean and then other changes that Superintendent Downing spoke of. Under the operating non-salary budget, no major changes. And again, it's reflective of updates to instructional technology and professional development, which is going to be overseen by our teaching and learning department.
And certainly last but not least is our Nashoba Regional High School. You will see we're leveraging many of the same strategic initiatives at Nashoba Regional High School, as well as in the targeted review report. What I can share with you at the high school is the changes that you see in this flow chart are very, very simple. It is bringing the current dean at the high school that is paid through the ESSER grant that ends this year into the high school budget. And I think we gave some detailed explanations of that in the past, as well as the shift out of the guidance counselor to Florence Sawyer School. So the net change at the high school is a 0.0. But what I'll also say about that is that as we look at building the distributive leadership plan across the district, that's our strategic initiative 4.1, as well as looking at the multi-tiered systems of support, we are working together with the NREA in negotiations right now on what the potential of those structures would look like. And so those ideas are currently in negotiations and not reflected on this flow chart as we respect the process of negotiations to ultimately get to the place that we're going to be. So if your question is, why aren't we seeing changes at the high school, even though we've seen some declines in enrollment at the high school, the answer to that is we are in negotiations. And if I were to express any of the thoughts of the changes that are potentially there, that would be a violation of bargaining, and we certainly don't want to do that. So with that being said, I will turn it to Mr. McCarron.
So the high school salary budget is represented here. Again, we are moving that Dean of Students position into our operating budget as it currently is being funded through ESSER. One other thing of note, obviously you see supplies, services, and general expenses all collapse into one line. I want to compliment Dr. Boynton and her leadership team, the department heads. We met back in October, November to talk about budgeting, and from what I saw, what was submitted, they were very, I think, responsible in looking at expenses and what was absolutely necessary. A lot of the increases are due to potential new programs such as a statistics course at the high school. And I know that Assistant Superintendent Friend's been meeting with those department chairs as well about guiding the work all into the strategic plan. And I think it reflected in what they've submitted to Dr. Boynton and passed through to us relative to their non-salary budgets.
So, committee members, that was the longest time I'm going to ask you to hold your breath tonight, as the longest part of our budget presentation, longest segment of it is giving you a thorough walkthrough of our schools. So at this point, we'll pause to take any of your questions.
All right. So why don't we start with the farthest east? Is that okay?
By all means.
So we're going to start with any questions that are relevant to Stowe. I think we're going to probably have 4 sections of this. It's going to go Stowe, Bolton, Lancaster, High School. All right, Scott, go right ahead.
Thank you. Well, that's a lot of detail to chew on. So thank you so much for putting that very helpful report together. I have 2 questions. One is, the dean seems to be a theme throughout the what's going on. It looks like you're adding a dean to most, if not all, of the schools. Can you tell me what a dean is? And my second question is more about the trend in the budget over the last 5 or 6 years. It looked like in general, the budget has been higher than inflation. And I'm wondering, what's that attributable to?
Yeah, so Mr. Powell, your second question will come back to, if you can please just mark your question and re-ask it again when we come back to the final section of the budget, because we'll discuss that.
Okay.
And I'll come back to your dean question at this point. So if that's acceptable to you, sir.
Yes, that's fine.
So the dean position, we have had a dean, we have 2 deans in the school system currently. And so we would be adding 2 more in terms of what they're actually doing. I'm giving you what the change in the budget looks like, because the high school dean position is currently, we've had this position now for 3 years, and that position has been funded out of grant funds. It has proven to be highly valuable. And we then tested that model in Luther Burbank when we made the late change in administration last June of, rather than hiring another administrator, we hired a dean to try to leverage what we had learned at the high school. So that being said, to balance out the 2 towns, we would be adding a dean in Bolton and a dean in Stowe. Now, what does the dean position do? You can think of the dean position as being very connected to the student life from the day. This involves the entry and dismissal of students. It involves investigating student conduct issues that come up. It involves working with families and developing response plans and developing strategies on how to mitigate situations in school. So there's a wide laundry list of pieces that the dean does do. What the dean does not do is the dean does not evaluate teachers for instructional assistants. That is the responsibility of the principals and assistant principals. So there's this sort of symbiotic relationship that happens between the dean and the administration that this is how the music is made, right? As the dean is supporting in one way, it's freeing up the principal to do other elements of leadership within the school. And where we've seen a great benefit to this, particularly in Lancaster this year, and what we've heard from our teachers really is in that response time. When a student might be in a moment of distress, and maybe the principal is occupied with a teacher at a central office meeting, where have you, that person is able to respond with a targeted focus of getting in, working with that student, working with that family and that teacher. So the big way to describe it is the dean is really sort of the student life administrator / teacher that supports in both arenas.
All right, great. Karen.
Great, thanks. And thank you for all this information. This is really helpful. I have two questions. One is related to the dean. So if deans are not evaluating teachers, so I was just trying to go back to the Hale Middle School edition. So if we're adding a dean and we're dropping an assistant, 0.6 assistant principal, does that then mean that the at least under the current model, that the principal there would now have to do all of the teacher evaluations?
Yeah, so at Hale Middle School, with the reduction of the 2 sections at 6th and 7th grade, we know that principal would have 12, I'll just talk about it in terms of the general classroom, would have 12 general classroom evaluations. While at our elementary schools, there are 24 sections when we're at full sections with an assistant principal. That is 12 per person. So that meets the evaluation responsibilities that we look for, and that's a balanced way to provide those evaluation responsibilities.
Great, thank you. And then my other question is about the math coaches. So we currently have math specialists, and they're being sort of shaped into math coaches. And I know every district can define those things a little bit differently. So could you maybe define the difference for people between a math specialist and a math coach? And then I might have a follow-up question.
Yeah, and I know that Ms. Friend may be talking about this in her portion as well. I'm going to define it as this. Our math specialists and literacy specialists are going to be our champions of MTSS, our champions of multi-tiered systems of support. So they will be working together with teachers in looking at student work and student data, deciding what are the targeted instructional practices that we need to put into play for these students, and then executing a coordinated strategy to deliver those targeted strategies right now. We don't have that in our system currently. We have our administrators, and we know from what we've talked about the workload of the administrators, we need to build in capacity to have that lead. Now, what I can say is highly effective coaching models that I've both seen and that I've also worked with from talking with other superintendents involves not a strict coaching model per se, but doing the coaching through live action professional development with students in the classroom setting. So these coaches are not coaches that would live in an office and then you would visit with. To the contrary, these would be people that are deployed throughout the school, working with students and teachers on those targeted intervention practices in that coordinated way.
Great, you answered my other question. Thank you.
I have a quick question about Stowe, and maybe it's just, I'm not understanding it well. It seems that Hale is losing the 0.2 EL FTE. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's being added to center.
Mm-hmm.
Is that reflected in the center slide? That center should have an increase of 0.2 or?
I was going too fast. Oh, it is, excuse me, there's a bullet missing. The bullet missing for account adjustment is missing from that slide.
Okay.
I'll make that adjustment. It's calculated for in the total FTE.
Okay.
So that number is accurate, but the account adjustment bullet is missing in center school. Thank you for that.
And I think I have another question, but it's like it's a district-wide question, so perhaps I'll hold it to the end.
Yes, we'll have a district-wide section.
Any other questions about Stowe? Let's move over to Bolton. Any questions about the Bolton slides? Maureen?
Sorry, I can't find my little hand raised thing. I had a question on Stowe. Can I squeeze that in?
Go right ahead.
Sorry. My question about Stowe was it for center school, it looks like literacy specialist is a decrease of 0.5. Is that correct? But in the notes, it says center literacy specialist redefined as K through 8 literacy coach 0.1 increase.
That's correct. So
yeah, sorry.
So just for, that's to show just the center school FTE, that 0.5 literacy specialist, there's a 1.0 increase attached to that in terms of FTE. I want to be clear about this. We're talking about FTEs. We're not talking about human beings, right? The human beings is a discussion about how then we deploy people. So this is just FTE. A 0.5 FTE, we would have to add a 10th to get to the 0.6 coaching side of that position at center. So then I'll move over to Hale, and you'll see this is where there's an error. Where it says center literacy specialist redefined as K-8 literacy coach, that is an error on that slide, Ms. Marzone. And I think that's from when I moved that over from the other side. It should just say 0.4 literacy coach increase at Hale. And then it balances out to the same FTE that is there.
Okay. And so I guess I think I might still be confused about the difference between the specialist and the coach then. So the coach is a new role. It's just not a name change.
I think it's in the function, Ms. Marzone, in terms of leading those things that I've described to Ms. Devine. As our interventionists play now, they're very much specifically involved with very specific students, and their role in leading professional development, in leading data discussions, in leading instructional best practices is not the emphasis. So what we're saying is we're going to put more emphasis on those elements. And by naming it what it is, the coach, but still continuing to provide targeted practices, we're able to do that.
Does that help, Maureen?
So, I think I get it. Can I just say it in a different way and see if I'm right?
Yeah.
Does that mean they're going to be like a coach for teachers to go to be able to, I guess, provide that assistance more in the classroom rather than the pull-out strategy that the specialists are used for?
I think Ms. Marzoni would be, I would be answering that in a way that I'm not certain, because what has to happen is you have to have the data meetings where you're looking at the student work and you're looking at the student performance data to understand what is our targeted steps going to be. It is quite plausible that the one strategy the team may collectively come to is by doing some regrouping strategies and building some sort of affinity skill groups amongst a team of people, of which the math coach would participate in delivering that instruction. So I think what we're trying to do is illustrate the importance of this position, but the organics of what is happening, will happen ultimately live in those situations will be up to the educators based upon the students that are in front of them and the skilled struggles that they're presenting.
Okay. And just to be clear, the literacy specialist and the math specialist, that's no longer going to be a term. They're now going to be referred to as math coaches and literacy coaches.
Well, what you'll see is that particularly on the center slide,
Yeah.
you will see that there are still 2 literacy specialists in the elementary schools that will be doing strictly targeted intervention for students.
Okay.
So yes.
I think
we
I
will
get
have
it now.
both. Yeah, we will continue to have both. It's a portion of that subgroup of individuals that we're reimagining. And what we need to do is we need to let the data tell the story to us in terms of how we fund future budgets regarding MTSS. And this is our first year in looking at the assessment data that we're collecting through Renaissance Learning and then building student data in the classroom around that to get the picture of students. It's plausible. We're going to come back to this committee and say, we're moving forward with this model. For us to be even more effective, we may need some positions, say in the math targeted interventionist way. But for us to get to that place, we've got to build the strategy around the leadership of MTSS so that we have a deep understanding of what the demand and the need is collectively as a group of people to then move forward with that strategy.
Okay. Yeah, that helps now. I see that there is the specialist still and then the coach. I guess my other question coming off of that was then, I'm just surprised to see a decrease in the literacy specialist. I get the increase for the coach, but I'm surprised to see a decrease in the specialist if literacy is the area where I believe we needed the most help coming out of the standardized testing from last year in the lower grades.
I hear your point, and I think, you know, in a perfect world, we would want to staff or buildings with everything they absolutely need. We are in times where we have to be fiscally responsible around the budget, doing it in a balanced way, as I outlined with our equity and equality positions from earlier. So sometimes that does involve tough choices. It's a matter of what are those high leverage choices that we can make. The research is clear that the way that you improve the overall learning in your school system is not by continuing to improve the practices in the targeted intervention methodology. You have the greatest impact by looking at that tier 1 of what we call the multi-tier student support systems triangle and lifting the overall practice of all educators, because then all students have their practice lifted. And that raises the overall education, even of students who are struggling. So this is our first foray into making that step. And I anticipate we're going to learn. We are a learning organization after all. And is it plausible we'll be coming back to this committee in future budgets to say, here's what we learned. This is how we need to grow and develop the strategy even further? Yes, I think that's very plausible. But let's take these steps. Let the data tell us the story. Let the student experience tell us the story, and then we can make our next step. So we want to be very measured and precise on how we're making these moves.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on to Bolton.
Yeah, I just have a procedural question. I have questions related to points. Ms. Cole is sick, but she's texted me some questions. Yes. Yes. I've also got some questions in this section that are sort of larger process and philosophical questions. Are we holding off on those questions for later, or can I ask those? This is, for example, the FY24 budget drivers slide. I have questions there.
Yeah, let's get to that. Oh, you mean from earlier?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's within the realm of this first section. Absolutely.
Okay. So I'm going to pick and choose my questions.
Do you mind if we cover the Florence Sawyer questions and then we can shift from this one and talk about the judges?
Sure. Yeah. Okay, so I will start with Ms. Cohen's question. She has had a few, I'll try to ask a few of them. First of all, with the dean at Florence Sawyer, the 1.0 FTE, be just for grades 6 to 8, or will that be K?
So Florence Sawyer is interesting in that we have, it's our only K-8 school that lives in these two buildings, with 3rd and 4th grade preschool being in the Emerson building itself. So the literal design that we have in front is it's a middle school dean. I will point to Mr. Bates and his administration team to make what are the decisions, the boots on the ground decisions that they need to make to best support students in the school. So the literal answer is yes, it's a middle school dean. Could that position deviate and support students in other grade levels as well? Yes, it could.
Another Amy Cohen question. So slide 10. Oh, sorry, that was not a, this is something same question. That might be the only others. Why is the budget for extracurricular advisors at Hale considerably larger than that in the same school?
Mr. McCarron.
So I can only speak to what's been submitted. So the principals submit what they're requesting, and again, I think it varies school to school.
Okay, I'll shift to my questions. I think I've got 2 or 3. My first question is that the FTE decrease in 2nd grade.
Yes.
I know you addressed this, and if I'm asking you a question you've already answered, I apologize if you did. That population will sort of move forward. Doesn't that create a population bubble with a need for 3rd grade, and then the year after 4th grade, that bubble sort of continues and moves forward?
Yes, you can do it exactly that way. The difference is at 2nd grade, the ratio is 22 to 1. At 3rd grade, it's 24 to 1. But we've increased only 2 extra pupils per class. If there's 5 sections, it's 10 kids. I mean, is that the so I'll give it to you in actual numbers. I don't have it put up here. It's 93 or 94 students that are in that grade level currently. That is in the boundary. It's 2nd grade of needing 5 sections. In 3rd grade, it only needs 4 sections. So it is an example of being right on the and in talking with Mr. Bates and understanding decisions community members are considering and forecasting some moves. We're confident in that decision.
My next question is about our strategic objectives for Florence Sawyer. I noticed that Florence Sawyer, along with, I think, most of the other school, but not all of them, share strategic objective 3.3, which is social emotional learning. And I imagine that's where the dean position comes into play. And guidance. How do we, how do you and your staff, your cabinet, how do you measure which strategic objectives are assigned to which schools, where there's a need and where there's not a need? Why is Florence Sawyer one of the schools that is being targeted for that strategic objective, whereas maybe a Lancaster school is not?
Yeah. So keep in mind that these particular slides, this particular section, the strategic objectives are related to specifically how we staff the school. We did not make any changes in guidance or administration at the elementary level. It was only at the middle school level. So you would only see it on the slides that have middle schools: Hale, Luther Burbank, and Florence Sawyer, because Florence Sawyer is a K-8 school. So that doesn't mean we're not working on social emotional best practices and distributed leadership at those elementary schools. I want to be abundantly clear about that. Yes, we are working on those strategic initiatives there. We're not doing it in the context of the FTE staffing, because we're trying to bring some balance to that staffing in the budget that has been out of balance the past few years.
Okay, I think my other questions are kind of broader questions, so I'll defer to Amy Vessels if she has questions.
Amy, did you have anything else for Bolton?
No, I don't.
Okay, let's move down the Great Road to Lancaster. Any friends have any questions about Lancaster?
Yes, I do, Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
Superintendent.
Yes, sir.
Perhaps slightly put you on the spot a little bit here. And I'd like to just go back in history to when the decision was made to elevate Mrs. Friend from the Luther Burbank principal position to the assistant superintendent position. At that time, the thought moving forward was, and again, I understand and respect that every individual has the right to change their mind.
Yeah.
But moving forward from the point where Mrs. Friend was elevated, the thought was that the administrative hierarchy in the Lancaster campus would be one principal, two assistant principals, and then a dean of students for the middle school. Or at least I believe that's what that put in place at that time. So perhaps you could share with me, where was that epiphany moment for you where you decided to shift away from that particular hierarchy and then create two principal positions, eliminate the assistant principal positions and assistant principal position and create the dean of student position?
So Attorney Gleason, I'll in point come back to put you on the spot somewhat. A portion of that story, you nailed it. You got it exactly right. And the portion that you described and told is the portion for this year. When we made this change last year, and I notified the Lancaster community about that, I notified the Lancaster community at that time, we will be conducting a principal search for Luther Burbank this year and moving forward with a model of two principals, an assistant principal, and the dean. And at the same time, as I reported to this committee, I said, however, we reserve the right to continue this model of one principal, two assistant principals, and a dean, if our experience tells us that's what we should do. So in that, and as we looked at this, we thought, boy, the real function, and particularly when we get into our multi-tiered systems of support, having two dedicated leaders in those buildings to push the initiatives forward were going to be important. So we are executing the strategy that we originally published to the Lancaster community of hiring for Luther Burbank, of which we've appointed Mr. O'Shea, and we are now in a principal search for Mary Williamson.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify, Madam Chair, that was not a critique or critic, you know, it's just, I'm quoting a great man who about a quarter century ago reserved the right to change his mind. I was just curious because I was just interested in what, you know, your observations were over the year that led you to say that this would be the best model moving forward. And I know that you stated earlier in your presentation that, you know, you're finding that dealing with student issues with the dean of student, there was a little bit more expediency to that. Is there anything else that you could share, at least with the people of Lancaster, as to this particular?
Yes, and I want to thank you for asking that question because I think it's important to bring light to this question. What experience has taught us this year and is that in the role of the principal and the responsibilities of the principal, looking at the scope of what they need, and then looking at the structure of what we've built in Lancaster, there's some limitations that have really taxed the time and the ability of the principal to meet the needs of the school at the time that those needs need to be met. A simple example of that would be the start and end time of the day. There's two sets of bells, there's two sets of bus runs. That expands the day of the principal and the responses that have to be. So that's just like a very sort of low-hanging fruit type example. But then also having command over the totality of up to 800 students in the school across those two buildings, we really think the better strategy is to have two principals so there can be some focus there. The narrative that I picked up on having some discussions with a couple of staff members have been, it's going well, doing a great job, but we notice the absence and presence at times because of the cross issues at the two buildings, and it pulls on the principal's time. I'm gonna tell you, Attorney Gleason, we have the same issue at Florence Sawyer. And that Mr. Bates is really stretched in trying to meet all those student needs, which is why adding the dean, shifting the guidance counselor from the high school are the supports that our folks in Bolton and at Florence Sawyer School really need. So it's sort of similar need, but a different strategy, because the strategy at Florence Sawyer School has long been embedded there. I will tell you, I have been presented with and posed the question, should we consider shifting Florence Sawyer School into two schools, Emerson and Florence Sawyer? And I said, well, thank you for asking your question. We're not aware in the realm of having that conversation, but it just presented itself, sort of your question from the other direction.
All right. Lancaster seems to be, all right. So let's go toward our high school. Any questions specific to Nashoba Regional High? Yeah.
So this sort of goes back to Florence Sawyer. There's a shift of the guidance counselor from the high school to Florence Sawyer. I'm curious what impact that has on the remaining guidance counselors at the high school and their caseload.
Yeah, so what we have at the guidance counselors, and forgive me if I sound like I'm shouting, with the owl sitting over there, I'm trying to be super loud so our members that are remote can hear me. So I hope I'm not shouting in your ears, remote members. So in that way, currently in the FY 23 budget, there are 7 guidance counselors cited. Now, one of those guidance counselors is specifically there for the bridge program at the high school that we've described to this committee in detail before. So that gives us 6 FTE in guidance for the overall population of the school. One of those 6 is the department head that leads all the efforts around guidance. So by shifting one of the 5 remaining guidance counselors to Florence Sawyer, we're now left with 4 guidance counselors to work on and service the just over 800 students. So 4 guidance counselors can take us really up to a threshold of 1,000 students by our standards. And so right now they would have caseloads next year of approximately 200 to 210 students each, which are still under the student to guidance counselor ratio that is recommended.
And just as a practical matter, your director has a caseload.
Oh, absolutely. And not only has a caseload, works directly with all the department heads across all the other departments, across special education, students and families, college entry, a myriad of responsibilities. So that department head of the guidance department is really one of the most essential and critical positions in our school system.
Any other questions specific to the high school? Kirk, I am gonna pose my question now that was kind of across the district. Can you just talk a little bit about the technology teachers? And I couldn't quite track.
Thank you.
Probably because of my eyesight, but what's going on with our technology teachers? Are we gonna have them in each elementary school? I know tech ed has been moved to middle schools, et cetera.
Thank you for that question. So when we talk about tech ed is not technology. You can think of this in previous generations of school as industrial ed. So students are doing things with their hands, they're building things. I happen to see and hail some students building projects around aeronautics and building planes out of woodcraft constructions combined with paper construction. So that is really that hands-on technical engineering aspect that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Technology, in terms of what we think of as devices, platforms, computers, internet, those types of things, the only change that we have is in the technology position at Florence Sawyer that is a support level position and is working with Florence Sawyer students Lancaster students or Luther Burbank students, or even the elementary, I suppose. And then is on call to teachers that may call for support. And so that's the position that we're reducing. We are not reducing the instructional technology support positions at all in our district. Those are remaining. And so those positions will continue to remain. It is as we move forward, and hopefully we get to the place of having the director of innovation and digital learning, that leader will work together with the instructional technology teachers to define and build the vision of the future for our technology instruction. So this budget is setting the table for what is yet to come. Can I define that for you today? No. Because if I defined it for you today, I would be cutting the legs out. I would be taking away the expertise and the intelligence of the educators in that realm who are going to be the ones that craft that vision and that strategy for the future. But we've got to set the table and make that happen.
Awesome. All right, I feel like we're good.
Is this my green light to ask the
The driver.
broader view question?
In the opening section of the budget, yeah, absolutely.
I'll defer if other people have questions too. I feel like other people.
Maureen, something else? Right ahead.
Yeah, I had a question on the high school. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to double check. So the assistant principals are staying the same at the high school. It's adding a dean position, which is different from Florence Sawyer, right? It was the assistant principal is no longer, and we're adding a dean position.
No, Florence Sawyer School will continue with a principal, 2 assistant principals, and a dean.
Oh,
So you'll
okay.
see in the flow chart, 2 assistant principals for the Florence Sawyer School.
Oh, I missed that. Okay. All right. And then the high school is 2 assistant principals and adding a dean.
Yes. So Florence Sawyer and the high school will look the same in terms of their administration and dean supports. And Florence Sawyer has nearly 800 students. The high school has approximately 50, 60 students more than Florence Sawyer. So you can see those equivocations in that balance.
Okay. And it's Hale, that's Hale Center School is going to have the principal and a dean.
So at the end of the day, all 3 towns have 3 administrators and 1 dean. The high school would have 3 administrators and 1 dean.
Got
It
it.
just so happens, the math of our town works out that we have approximately 800 students in each section.
Okay. Got it. That makes sense. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
I said, we're perfect that way, Maureen. All right, Mike, to you.
I'll just make a quick plug. I'm not gonna ask all the questions now, knowing that I can reserve some of my questions for our upcoming budget warrant committee meeting coming up next week. Just making sure that I mention that publicly. Our budget increase, currently the proposed budget is a 5.31% increase from FY 23. And if you look at that first slide, slide number 11, I believe, well, at least on my version, it was, yeah, slide number 11. 75% of that 5.31% comes from salaries, insurance and benefits, and costs associated with special ed. And if you look at special ed specifically, that accounts for 28% of that 5.31%, nearly $1 million. What is driving this substantial increase in sped costs and transportation costs?
So we're going to go into detail that when Ms. DeAngelis comes with her section of the budget.
Okay. I can re-ask that question. And then the other question is related to this slide. This is essentially the same big 15 line items.
You're talking about the operation
There are some
report?
differences, for sure. That's kind of what my question is.
Yeah, so it is different. And if you're looking for sort of a correlation between those 15 account areas that we present on our monthly operations, the best walkover is to the executive summary, which is at the beginning of the budget PDF. The exception to that is the high school. We present operational reports regarding the high school. We compress that down into just the high school. If you look on the executive summary, at the beginning of the budget, each one of the departments has its own executive summary piece. So with the exception of those departments, the executive summary is the walkover from that operational report.
Okay, and so is it fair to say then that if we look at each individual school, there are sections of the school budgets that belong in different budget drivers?
Correct. So for example, I will choose the Sawyer campus because we're sitting here today. So a salary for a special educator at Sawyer, that salary would sit in the special education budget. A salary for a classroom teacher would sit in the Sawyer salary line. However, represented here, both of those salaries are noted under salaries for existing personnel. And that salaries for existing personnel FY24 proposed is reflective of all the changes that Superintendent Downing just went through on the FTE charts. The other piece that you maybe would see in two different places would really be transportation. So under athletics, there's transportation, but we also have our regular runs as well. So those live in two different budgets, but they are compressed here under that transportation regular day late line there.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Yep.
I think we're gonna move on to the next section.
Well, as promised, Madam Chair, that was the longest component of our budget that we'll be going through tonight.
Okay.
And it's at this point that I would like to introduce our Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning, Ms. Laura Feld.
Thank you. Thank you, Superintendent Downing, and thank you to the committee. We are so grateful and continue to be so grateful for the support that we receive from the school committee and our larger school community. As a result of your collective support and the hard work of our teachers, we are just pleased to share that we continue to make steady progress towards important state, school, and district initiatives, including initiatives relative to our strategic plan and our Portrait of a Nashoba graduate, which we have showcased here. I'd like to take a couple moments to highlight the impact of the FY23 budget as it relates to evidence of implementation, because the work that we anticipate moving forward with that is reflected in the FY24 requests are directly related to our current implementation of current initiatives, if you will. So those include continuing to make great strides. Yep. Continuing to make great strides toward the completion of our curriculum audit and our curriculum development and alignment work that's reflective of our Portrait of a Nashoba graduate. In tandem, we are currently exploring new curricula, new offerings, new areas of study to further strengthen and extend innovative programming and offering for our students. We're fully engaged in the implementation of our mathematics, Bridges in Mathematics implementation for our elementary learners as we work to establish like a strong foundation, conceptual understanding in math for our students K to 5. As Superintendent Downing has indicated, we've implemented Renaissance Learning K to 8 for our students for reading and K to 9 for math in support of universal screening, and laying the foundation for our implementation of MTSS in the fall. We've implemented Panorama, which is a survey instrument to help elevate student voice and student perspective for the purpose of supporting student needs with targeted intention. All of these efforts work to support our strategic plan and support our community vision for our Portrait of a Nashoba graduates who are equipped with skills they need for the ever-changing world, graduates who are able to communicate and create and problem solve and think critically, graduates who are kind and demonstrate empathy, and graduates who are ready to be their best selves and impact the world. So as we have before you this evening, the Department of Teaching and Learning budget is intended to maintain this current work and intended to move forward with this current work as we enter year 2 of our strategic plan, as we focus on curriculum, instruction, assessment, instructional software, and professional development. Our work is complex and interrelated, intentionally forward-thinking, and predicated on continual improvement for the benefit of our students. With the FY24 budget request of note as it relates to curriculum development, our requests here are all in line with our newly revised and developed curriculum review cycle and schedule that we presented to you in December, including a focus next year for science, K-12, fine and performing arts, K-12, early literacy, and world language as we think about that curriculum review schedule, that chart we presented in December. The requests here also include a request for funding to support an equity audit, which is specifically a specifically identified initiative in our strategic plan within strategic objective number 3. The request for the equity audit here comprises the increase in our budget request for this line from FY23. Our textbook adoption line here reflects a 28% decrease from our request from FY23. And the decrease is a result of last year being full-scale implementation in terms of a request for full-scale implementation of Bridges in Mathematics, which we're implementing this year. This was a large purchase from FY23. As we enter ahead into year 2, our requests are looking at a cost to sustain implementation for student consumables for mathematics, such as workbooks and what have you. Our textbook adoption line for FY24 reflects a request for funds to support the purchase of high quality curriculum materials for middle school science and engineering. This is a direct result, as you may remember from Ms. Philbin's presentation in December, a component of our presentation, a direct result of our curriculum review schedule and reflective of needs relative to our curriculum audit. In terms of requests in support of professional development, we see an increase here in our request from FY23 due to teaching and learning really working to serve as the centralized hub and location for the selection, distribution, and implementation of professional development to ensure that our work is aligned and focused in support of our strategic plan and our portrait of a Nashoba graduate and supports the curriculum work. As you will see, connections to the strategic plan here include connections to 5 of the 7 initiatives within strategic objective 2, teaching, learning, and leading. We have a request here for professional development to support deeper learning and deeper assessment as it relates to content and pedagogy, professional development. This includes work to support stage 2 and stage 3 of our curriculum mapping work that we've begun this year. It also includes professional development to support project-based learning, cross-curricular connections, continued work as it relates to social emotional integration, technology innovation, and targeted math instruction to support implementation of Bridges in Mathematics intervention for students K-5 in support of our multi-tiered system of support plan beginning in the fall. As well, our professional development requests include requests to support educator evaluation training to improve evaluation feedback to further help elevate the feedback our administrators and our evaluators are providing to our teachers, as well as a request to support professional development to help launch our multi-tiered system of support model through the professional learning community model training to support district-wide implementation of MTSS. As a result of our curriculum audit, we have a reduction in requests in support of instructional software by just about 10% from FY23. So This is a result of the elimination of the need for Atlas, which was our former curriculum platform, which was just not providing utility for our teachers. And we received feedback from our teachers to that end. We also have reviewed the usage of our instructional tools for alignment and overall use using the Learn platform application that provides us with information about usage by grade level, by content area, K-12, and that's been very helpful for us to access as we've engaged in our audit of instructional software, K-12. The results and the requests here that you see reflect high usage, high utility, and high curriculum alignment, including the addition of Star Phonics as a supplement to our Renaissance learning platform in support of the science of reading and phonics instruction. In terms of curriculum membership and dues, these reflect district memberships for state and national core curriculum associations, including MathSol for our English learner department, as well as Ed Leader 21, which we've spoken about this year, which is a national organization supporting our continued connections and professional learning with other schools and districts nationwide in support of Portrait of a Nashoba graduate and deeper learning and deeper assessment practices. Finally, as Superintendent Downing had mentioned, we have a request here for consideration from the committee for the support of an addition of a director position. That is a director support our innovation and digital learning, which is reflective of a net change of a 0.4 FTE from FY23. As Superintendent Downing had outlined, this position would be a critical leadership position for our school system and is noted as a priority in the strategic plan. This position is critical for helping lead our district and our faculty and staff in supporting intentional technology integration and instructional practices. It's also critically essential as we work to build our plan, hopefully, for a 21st educational environment in our, hopefully, new high school building project.
So based on what Assistant Superintendent Friend has shared and what we've worked on, reflected in the salaries of teaching and learning administration includes the move from a 0.6 to a 1.0, making it a 3.0 department, including that Director of Digital Learning and Innovation. The other changes that you see she spoke to with regards to curriculum development and the changes there. And most notably under the professional development, the increase, as I spoke to earlier within the buildings, we're moving professional development funding in some part to the teaching and learning department in order to work on and enact our strategic plan relative to staff development.
In terms of other funding sources, we provided this slide here for you to provide information about some additional funding sources that we receive that are directly support the work of teaching and learning across the district. And that's relative to ESSA funding. ESSA stands for the Every Student Succeeds Act, which provides federal funds to help support and increase our capacity of states and local educational agencies to provide all students with access to a well-rounded education and to really help work to level the playing field. At Nashoba, we receive ESSA funding in 4 title grants as listed. We'd like to make a note that our ESSA funding for FY23 saw a decrease in 3 of the 4 title grants. That includes Title I, Title II, and Title III. For example, our Title I grant saw a decrease in close to $13,000 from FY22 to FY23. For each grant, proportional allocations are set aside as a reserve, and you see those indicated here in the parentheses. for private nonprofit schools within our community, including any neglected and delinquent schools. As the public school district, we serve as the agency for these funds and retain control of the federal funds used to provide such services. Our allocation for our funds for these title grants are recalculated each year at the federal level. And the calculations are based on how at-risk students are defined at the federal and state levels. We will not have an indication of changes to our allocations until July this summer. In closing, we are extremely proud of the work of our faculty and staff. And we are deeply grateful. I am deeply grateful of the support we receive from this committee and the leadership that we have been able to benefit from our curriculum directors this year, as well as our district-wide math curriculum lead. We continue to be appreciative of the support of our families as we work to provide our students with the best education with forward-thinking momentum and needs as we possibly can. So we thank you for your consideration of our requests.
All right, my friends, any questions from the committee on teaching and learning? Joe?
I have a question, yeah. And I'm not sure I would direct this question to, but it pertains to the information that was on slide 1 regarding curriculum development and the equity in curriculum, the equity audit and the curriculum development, or the audit to,
Oh, the equity audit.
yeah, the audit of district-wide curriculum conduct, effective curriculum review cycle. So understanding that in the context of a $65 million budget, the sum of $73,300 is not a significant amount of money. I understand that, but can someone explain to me what we would expect to get for $50,000 for an equity audit, when that's twice what we're going to be spending on an audit of district-wide curriculum? So I don't profess to be an expert on any type of audit, especially an equity audit, but what little I understand is that those are geared to highlight disparities in the educational experience and opportunities. So as professional educators, I don't expect that you would have a detailed understanding of where those disparities may exist, but you might have a general one. So perhaps you could articulate for me where in our curriculum and our educational experience do we see disparities that would warrant expending this sum of money for an audit in this regard?
I think that's the point of doing the audit. When we're looking at the equity audit, I think a big factor you're seeing there is external versus internal. Obviously, we do them internally. That's part of the construct of what we do. If we were doing an equity audit internally, what we bring into that is our own biases and perspectives. And in presenting your own bias and perspective, sometimes you may not see what is apparent or needed. And so by going external, as was recently posted in the RFP, the $50,000, and I hate to break this to you, Attorney Gleason, it could be on the low side. We're going to see what comes forward with these equity audits, because in talking with other superintendents and works that were done with the district, there are some school systems that have paid upwards of $100,000 for equity audits to understand what they're doing. And it goes through curriculum, hiring practices, day to day, around a multitude of particular populations, and understanding, are we being balanced and fair, coming back to our core values of building a sense of belonging for all. So when we're thinking about the equity audit and the cost of it, I think it's a good investment for us to go outside so that we have eyes that can come in and help us understand our organization so that we can create that sense of belonging for all.
Can I just follow up on that? And I appreciate that, Superintendent Downey. But I guess my question was more focused on, as professional educators, I would assume that you would at least have some inkling, some notion, some idea of where within our practices and procedures in the district some sort of disparity exists. And I'm hoping and I would again request, is there anything you or any of your staff can speak to specifically where you think, and I won't hold you to it, like, there's definitely, perhaps you might think that there is a disparity or an equal opportunity for our students.
I'll pull one that is actually set in our strategic plans, and that's the leveling of our courses. And students that come from Black and brown backgrounds, their opportunity to attend those courses and their participation in those courses. So there are some things statistically that we can look at today that would point us in that direction. And leveling is a common practice across school systems across our country. And so looking at the courses that way and students having access to those courses, particularly when those courses are based upon recommendations, it's upon us to go outside our organization to have that evaluation done so that we can understand, do we have some internal biases in terms of how we're placing students in courses that are impacted subconsciously? We need to know and understand those things. So the audit helps us ask those questions and dive into those moments so that we can think about strategically what we need to do for the future. So the equity audit isn't going to come back with a list of, you need to do ABC things. It's more holding up the mirror of, these are the things that we see within your organization that you should be talking about, thinking about, and addressing, both in terms of day-to-day operations, but in terms of the policies and practices you put forward. So in that way, we'll have to learn from what that process looks like to know those steps. But we can see in certain obvious data sets where that can occur. That's the example I illustrated.
Madam Chair, I don't want to monopolize this, but I was just wondering if I could just ask one last question. And forgive me, I'm going to quote Denzel Washington from Philadelphia. Explain it to me like I'm a 5-year-old. I didn't quite understand what you were saying about leveling and talking about students of color and the course choices that they have or which they're scheduled to.
Yeah.
Could you, as a courtesy, just, and I profess ignorance in this regard, could you just explain that to me in the base, simplest, but I'm not quite understanding what you're saying as far as disparities are concerned.
So in our high school, we have a series of courses, and you can say, let's just apply it to a grade level English course, whether it's 9th, 10th, 11th, or 12th grade. There is college prep, accelerated, honors, and then AP courses. We also have, for students that have specialized programming, prescriptive courses. So if we look at how those courses are leveled, and they all have weighted GPAs to them, and we examine at what rate are our students of color enrolled in passing successfully AP courses. The question is that proportional to the reflection of our population? So that we can see, are our students accessing that under the basic assumption of all students can learn? And is there some disparity in terms of how we're providing that program for students, particularly when many of those courses require recommendations? And that's not to say that people are making intentional recommendations. That's what the unconscious bias element is all about. It is, what are the recommendations moving forward? And what does the data then tell us about that? So we're in a discovery place for that, not a claim place for that. But we do see in those courses of where students are placed, there's some disproportion in terms of how students are placed in those courses.
Following up on the equity audit, is there a place we can find that RFP?
Yes, I can send it to the school committee.
Yeah, it's posted on the state website.
It's on,
Yeah,
because it's an RFP, it has to go through certain channels as part of procurement. However, it also exists on our district website, so I can provide the link.
thank you.
All right, going to Amy Vessels.
Okay, I had a question about the district-wide professional development there under, I guess it was like 89,300. I was curious about how that was addressing the strategic plan goal of increasing authentic experiential learning opportunities across all classrooms. is there a specific PD targeting that this year?
So, may I? So a portion of the request that's included in that line is to provide teachers with professional development around deeper learning and deeper assessment opportunities, which gets at project-based learning, experiential learning, and opportunities for connectedness across disciplines for learning experiences. So that's the stage, the second stage, and really the third stage of curriculum mapping. Right now, we're in stage 1 of curriculum mapping, as we had shared in December. So this would be the next iteration, is really digging in to our instructional practices and our assessment methodology with the lens of that portrait of an Nashoba graduate. So yes.
Okay. I had one other question.
Go for it, Amy.
Can you talk a little bit more about what the responsibilities would be for that new role of the Innovation and Digital Learning Curriculum Director?
Yeah, sure.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
What was the question once more?
The question was around the roles and responsibilities of the new director position. Would you like to take that on? Or?
Yeah, we outlined that in the job description that we brought to the school committee in our previous meeting. So you should have that in the meeting materials from the previous meeting.
Okay. All right, thanks.
And that was brought to the personnel subcommittee, and we did toss it around a whole lot. But because it's ultimately not a new position, it is almost a courtesy that it's being brought to the school committee, which I appreciate. And so, the personnel subcommittee is holding it right now. And as this comes through, perhaps a couple more iterations, the budget, we will see that kind of come before the full committee again, just to solidify that.
That's right. So by policy, it's not a position that necessarily has to come before the committee. We're taking that extra step because we want to be thorough. It's aligned to our strategic plan, the strategic work we're doing, and deserves some vetting.
Any other questions? No, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is for Assistant Superintendent Friend. One of the themes that came out of the targeted review from April of 2022 that was performed by DESE was the multi-tiered system of supports, MTSS. We've seen that already quite a bit in the presentations. And obviously, implementing that at various schools has a budgetary impact. Can you just share with us what that actually looks like for students? Like, how is that going to impact students directly?
That's a great question. So, in thinking about pulling all of this together, right? So we've launched Renaissance Learning this year to provide our staff with real-time data in terms of a universal screener. We're looking at building our capacity at looking at data and then defining the action steps based on that data. That's where our instructional coaches will become incredibly useful. Because it's one thing, right, to look at data. It's another thing to act upon the data. So the intention here with MTSS is
Forgive us. Just take your closer to the job.
is to take what the data is telling us in a systematic way and then define next steps. Whether that's our instructional coaches working with our teachers to talk about a shifting need in tier 1 in terms of the classroom instruction, because that's what the data is telling us. Like, there needs to be a shift in how we're approaching this concept or skill in totality based on universal instruction, or we have a subgroup of students who are requiring targeted instruction based on a specific skill or concept, or do we need to move to a tier 3 intervention where a student is requiring individual support? So we have elements of this implemented now in our district. Our teachers are wonderful. Are we approaching it systematically with the highest amount of intentionality district-wide K-12 with all of our resources at the table? there's improvement there. So in thinking about the role of the instructional coaches, they will be leading these data teams along with and in support of our building administrators, and then taking that information and making plans to directly impact targeted instruction as a next step, whether that's at the classroom level, the small group level, or the one-to-one level. It's a missing piece for us. Happening in pockets, but not systematically and systemically.
And that, maybe not codified specifically. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Laura. We're gonna move on, everybody, to our next piece here, and that is Pupil Personnel Services.
Yeah, so you might have seen us making a bit of a technology adjustment to get the speaker closer to the presenters table.
That's so smart.
I would like to introduce to the committee, Ms. Joan DeAngelis, our Director of Pupil Personnel Services.
I want to thank the school committee for having me this evening, and thanks to Superintendent Downing and the business manager, Russ Mulkern. Laura Friend and I have worked very closely together on our budget this year as well, because we have a lot of crossover events, and we work very closely together on a number of initiatives in the district. So I want to thank you for supporting our students. We feel that support through the school committee, through the budgets and the requests that we make on behalf of our students and our staff. The connections to the strategic plan, I think, are really clear around teaching, leading, and learning. So I'm not going to read the strategic planning initiatives. I think you've seen a lot of them tonight, but a lot of it connects through the PPS. We're weaving all of our work and all the work that we do in the district through the PPS department. And thankfully, Superintendent Downing went through every single school chart, and in purple was highlighted all the special ed staffing was in purple on each of the slides that you saw tonight at each of the individual schools. So this chart represents the total amount of staff throughout the district that support students in special education. And I just want to make mention that sometimes these positions, I think you saw some of those shifts being made as the presentation was happening earlier. And we move positions based on student needs and based on what's been recommended through the IEP team and what's in students' IEPs. So sometimes positions are shifting to other buildings based on needs. So I want to talk a little bit about the grants through the PPS department tonight. The IDEA 240 grant, I can only give you the allocation for FY23, which is $855,095. We will not get an allocation likely until August. So you can see that this is only 0.7% increase from last year. So if you looked at my slides from last year, you would see I'm always giving you the current year allocation because I can't predict year to year what's going to be allocated. So we base our grants on the current numbers. So in terms of that grant, what we do is we offset special ed transportation, and we allocated $700,000 for special ed transportation. So that includes both in-district transportation for kids that need transportation to school or different district schools, as well as out-of-district transportation. We have support staff salary from my office that there's an offset of $22,828. And then we have $267,000 for assessment, materials, travel, services, and consultation services for our programs. So I'm going to move to the IDA 262 grant, which is an early childhood grant. The allocation for FY23 was $21,696. There was a decrease in this amount this year of 14.1%. That allocation is really for a salary for a paraprofessional in one of our high needs programs in Lancaster. That's where we allocate the funds. And then the community partnership grant, I hope you've been reading the common because Liz Garafi is our early childhood coordinator, but she also serves as our chair for the community partnership grant. So that's where we're doing a lot of play groups in all of the communities. She's doing a lot of parent information sessions in the evening. You'll see one come out this week that's offered to all the parents in the district. And that allocation is $45,701. It's a 3-year grant, so it doesn't increase or decrease. That's the allocation. So that pays for part of the early childhood coordinator's salary to do that outreach into the community. This really helps us, just so you know, with Childmind, as we're bringing students into our playgroup, it really, our teachers are teaching at playgroup, and we can get to know the students in our community that are young and be suggesting if we feel like they may need a special ed referral. We're getting our eyes on our students quite young by bringing them into our 3 towns, which is really helpful because we want to do intervention as early as possible. The $8,000 is an offset to support an admin in my office that supports Liz in her work in terms of the announcements and the scheduling of screenings and so forth. And then there's supplies that go along with providing those services in the district. So those are the grants. I know that there'll likely be questions at the larger budget level that I'll be happy to answer. So I know that you can see that there's an increase of $712,583. At a prior school committee, I believe Superintendent Downing came forth and talked about the office service division indicating to districts they were going to put a 14% increase on all private school tuitions. So that is part of this increase. And in addition to that, we've had 5 students move in this year that are in out-of-district placements. We did not pay for those students. There's a move-in law, so we don't pay until the following year. But next year, we'll be responsible to pay for those out-of-district tuitions. So that's where you see that increase on the total amount in the budget drivers on that last page. In terms of special ed transportation, that's been increased to $128,248. And this is also due to move-ins. We have to transport those 5 students to their placements. And that's where that increase is coming for. So these are the proposed budgets. Thanks.
Thank you, Mrs. DeAngelis. So just in reviewing the salary pieces that were spoken to, not only in Superintendent Downing's review of the buildings, but also now within the PPS department. So those are broken out here. I want to note that because our preschool program sort of stands alone, it's not necessarily owned by the buildings. It's a district-wide preschool program with different sites. We did create a line this year that shows our preschool teacher salaries across the district instead of them separately within just our special education salaries, or included in our special education salaries. I do want to make note of what Mrs. DeAngelis did speak to with regards to out-of-district tuition. So there is that increase. And again, that's the OSD rate that's been proposed. That is also the fact that in FY24, we do need to incorporate those tuitions into our budget versus them being paid by previous districts. A little bit about the special education transportation, because the change percentage looks so large. There's a larger bill or larger cost to our special education transportation that is partially offset by the grant. So if we take that $700,000 offset from the grant to our special education transportation bill, and it goes up a certain percentage, our operating budget goes up because we do not have a guarantee that our grant is going to go up. So sort of the remainder that's on the district, the entirety of the change, even though it might be a percentage on a much larger expenditure, it looks like a bigger percentage on our budget because we're only paying a portion of the total cost in our operating. So that's how that flushes out to look so large. There's $700,000 also going into special education transportation through the grants.
All right, everybody, it's time for questions on people personnel services. Go ahead, Maureen.
When will we find out about the FY24 grants? Is that similar to the ESSA grants in July?
July or August is when we get the allocated amount sent to us.
Got it. Okay. Thanks.
Great. Go ahead, Karen.
I just have a question, a clarifying question on the staffing numbers. So the evaluation team leader / psychologist, there's 8.0 FTE. And then there's a separate box for psychologist 0.6 FTE. I'm just curious what the difference is. Are those team chairs / psychologists, like they do both roles and that person just has only psychologists as their role?
You have it, Karen. That's exactly what it is. We have a district-wide psychologist that just implements testing, and the others have dual roles across the district.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question about the preschool teacher salary line?
Yep.
Are they all PPS? I mean, it is an inclusion program.
Correct me if I'm wrong in any of my description of the program. The program is designed to support students with special needs at the preschool level. So we do not have any classrooms that are strictly on the non-special needs. We don't have a role model only classroom. All of our classrooms have role models and designed that certain way. The total preschool salaries that you see here, there is offsets from grants, as Ms. DeAngelis explained.
Okay, but they, like, all of their salaries come out of PPS because they exist. Although there are role model students in every classroom, they exist.
Correct.
Because of
The purpose,
intention.
right.
That's what's going on.
It's
Yes.
an integrated preschool. It is not a regular ed preschool.
Okay, my other question is about the circuit breaker offset that I think you identified with the kiddos who are outplaced. It seems like a very large number that we're gonna have to absorb next year.
So the offset is reflected in the budget. The ask for this year, FY24, was 1.8,028,860. The circuit breaker reimbursement offset is 1,052,183 for the difference of the total that was requested.
Okay, so this, and for those who don't know, and maybe myself included, circuit breaker is what the state kicks in to help with these extraordinary costs.
Yes, so what happens is that we have to pay they identify a foundation rate that the district has to pay. So in the coming FY24 school year, it's $49,474. That's our foundation rate that we have to pay. Any out-of-district tuition that is above that rate, we submit to circuit breaker, and they reimburse us up to, I want to say this very carefully, 75% has been consistent, but there are times in certain years that it's been 70 or sometimes less. So I think that we're very careful around that reimbursement calculation.
Yeah, I have some color to that. I think it's important to let the community know and let this committee know as well that the Mass Association of School Superintendents and their legislative lobbying arm are working with state officials right now. And we recognize the 14% increase in private school tuitions is extraordinary. And so there's lobbying efforts right now to look at revenue at the state level in regards to circuit breaker reimbursement. And can the state balance out this extraordinary increase in out-of-district private school costs by funding circuit breaker at greater rates so that school systems like ours can manage this budget season with this extraordinary rate increase. Those lobbying efforts are being constructed now. I will say that with the changeover of the governor, there's an extension of 30 days this year on when budgets are due, which means, and we'll talk about this when Ms. Mulcairn gives the final section of the budget, it is going to delay when the N1 is released to us to understand what those amounts are. So there's some political sword fighting going on right now so that we can get the funds that we need from the state level to support the students, because circuit breaker has never been funded at the level that it was intended to be funded at when the law was originally written. So we're going to continue those lobbying efforts. I spoke with a superintendent today about the actions on that, and we should know more in the next 4 to 6 weeks. So call your legislator.
Maureen?
I just wanted to check, so if I'm looking at slide 43, that this indicates that there's no changes in the full-time employees across these different positions for next year, right? It's remaining the same.
It is remaining the same, other than the positions that Superintendent Downing had talked about, the instructional assistants that had been moved from the regular ed budget to the special ed budget.
Yeah, we fund that based upon what the needs and the demands are. So going back to our equity slide at the very beginning of the presentation, that's where that would be reflected. So we just do an accounting of what's the total that we're going to need next year based upon what we know today. So it's so much different than looking at class size ratios. It really is just building it from zero up to this place.
Got it. And so this can be, this is the expected full-time, but they can move from school to school depending on the need that's shown at the different, in the different towns.
Yes, we readjust based on numbers and need.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Over to Mike.
Mr. Mulcairn, are sped transportation costs housed under the same reimbursement plan as general transportation costs?
No, those are separate. So it's not necessarily, correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Angels, it's not a reimbursement, it's an offset from a grant.
Perfect. Thank you.
Although those children are a part of, so they're still residents of our communities, I would assume that there's a small amount of transportation reimbursement in that general ed,
Yes.
right?
Only if their ridership is on, for lack of a better term, a big yellow school bus.
So they don't get counted in the number?
Not to my understanding, no.
And so in terms of, DESE has just started a circuit breaker program for reimbursement around transportation. So last year we got 25% reimbursement, and by surprise this year we got 50%. So we're hoping it's going to increase over time.
Thank you. All right, everybody, I think.
I have one last question. I
Go
don't
ahead,
know what it is, and I do not want to start at Donnybrook here, but I just want to be clear about something, at least in my mind. Okay, so going back to this slide regarding the Operations Service Division increase of 14% for out-of-placement students. So you just stated that there was lobbying efforts on the part of MASS, correct?
Yes.
All right. So could you clarify exactly what those lobbying efforts are? Is it strictly towards convincing the legislature to increase the amount of relief on the circuit breaker? Or are there lobbying efforts to decrease the OSD's recommendation in regards to the district placements? And I want to say this because I know that I think this is an issue that divides some of us on this committee. So I just was curious, and again, not looking to credit Donnybrook here, but you said call your legislature. I'm sitting out there, I'm listening. What would I be calling my legislature for?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Gleason, Attorney Gleason. The last I was briefed is that the lobbying efforts are focusing on the circuit breaker. We recognize the increase in the need for additional funding in private out-of-school placements. So this is one of those times where public education and private education is sort of at odds with each other based on some policy decisions with this dramatic increase. So it's the stance of the superintendents that we're not against that. It's what is the funding strategy then back to the school system to support that so that we can carry on in the business of the district. So the focus really is going to be upon the circuit breaker element.
All right, everyone. So always keeping our eye on the time, we're gonna move forward to our next section here, and that is technology. To the table.
Hello, everyone. Something for being here is actually hours. I'm trying my best to make it quick. So technology budget is pretty straightforward. So the major part is the hardware, software, the internet connection, the firewall. So it's very similar to previous years. So you will see a little bit increase in the hardware. Mostly it's caused by the chipset shortage and also supply chain issues. I already know that. Everything else is almost same compared to last year. There are two items worth to mention, which tie to our strategic plan. So in the coming year, one thing we like to change is switch a service provider for the communication part, meaning like the website hosting company. So the current company works, but not ideal. We see like almost issues happen almost every month. Actually including today. The company just sent out notice to all the clients. Their service stuff. And on top of that, the support part is getting less and less ideal. We reach out, it's really no timely response. So the new service provider definitely has much better product, and the support is fantastic. We work with them on the high school building project where we already like build some mobile apps. Not sure if you guys know that. And in this like couple weeks for the trial testing period, we really like their service and they are pretty knowledgeable. So for the new service provider, there are going to be three functions will help us improve our communication. One is definitely the website. It's going to be much better, feature, function, and everything is better compared to the current one. The second piece is the communication, which including the phone calls and text messaging for the notification part. Then the third one, which is the additional one compared to the current setup, is the mobile apps. So that will reach out to much more people, even like for student. So like more people using the mobile phone compared to like a regular computer. So that's one big item, we plan to change. So the second one is we got to implement a new visitor management system. We're gonna work with health and safety department, also facility department. We're gonna have a real time. We can check the visitor, their background, if they have some, something bad. So I think that's it. Any questions?
Anything else?
No, just it's reflective, I think, of the, we're shifting costs from one vendor to another to have a better communication system through technology. And then also the hardware increases are really due to inflation, shortages on supply chain, issues with chips, those types of things that when he received quotes back on what was expected as far as our needs for hardware moving into FY24, this is the quotes that we got back, which are still subject to change, but we're here today with this amount.
All right, great. Let's go to questions. Mike.
Excuse me, I'm a little bit hoarse this evening. Do we, or can you describe the extent to which we evaluate efficiencies within our contracted services? Is that something that we do on a year-to-year basis, where we revisit a contract with our vendors and our service providers? In a budget, it seems to have a theme of trying to find efficiencies. Is this an area where we do that as well? I'm sure this is pursued.
Yeah, I think I'd like to answer this question. Or
And
you do.
before I let you, can everybody speak louder? Because the owl.
Louder voices. Got it.
All right.
I have no problem with a louder voice. To your question, Mr. Haresh, where do we look for efficiencies in our contracted services? We are studying right now an HR portal that would replace our current HR portal and the functions of onboarding employees to how we post positions to how staffing changes in the district happens. It's the workflow of employees in the system. And we're looking at that system now and its integration with Power School. And as we look at it now, there's some potential cost savings as well as other efficiencies. When we do that, we have to look at, okay, if there's an increase in cost, what's the benefit of that? So if we have 3 systems, but yet we can shift over to one system and there's some cost there, well, then we have to balance what that decision would look like. But we do that on a regular basis. And that's just one example of what we're currently doing. Down the queue, down the line, I know we're looking at, for instance, for our pupil personnel services department, how the IEP system is working and its integration with our current system. So that's part of our annual process. So we're taking one at a time because when you're talking about data shifts, boy, those are big, big changes and require a lot of work behind the curtain to make those data changes. But anyway, yes, we do that.
So just as a quick follow-up, then we're not simply going from year to year and continuing without evaluating and reevaluating. We're sort of looking deeper in terms of what's our new need for function as well as cost.
That's right. That's right. Thank you.
All right, my friends, we're going to move on to Shondor's question. Go ahead, Shondor.
Could we unpack a little what contracted services means?
Okay, I can explain. So the major part on that is the internet connection, which is, right now we use Comcast, and also the internal connection. We have 7 buildings, so connect between schools, that is a fiber, also in Comcast. So those 2 are the major piece of this, and also the firewall, the Comcast firewall, and also content filter. Those are kind of the major piece for that.
And I assume we get E-rate funding?
Yes.
Yeah. I appreciated elsewhere in the presentation how grants were included. It would be nice to see how E-rate impacts funding of tech, like we saw with other grants.
We'll follow up in one of our next couple of school committee meetings with some of that detail.
Excellent.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, we're going to move on to our next section, that is health and safety. And I believe we're going to bring our nurse leader, Lisa Gilbecki, to the table. Hi, Lisa.
Hi. I'll do the blanket. Thank you for everybody for having us here this evening. I'll keep it short too, so we can move on. So here we are. Review of school safety and develop priority actions as district and for individual schools. We're requesting Raptor system, which is a Raptor visitor management system that would be placed in all schools. It empowers schools to streamline and control the visitor sign-in process while maintaining a higher level of security that we don't currently have. The system screens and tracks all visitors in real time. It does a little bit more than that, but speaking of just visitors to start, how it works is a visitor would enter the building, they present their ID, it goes through a small little device. It's within seconds that it takes seconds to process that screen. It screens them for a Corey and a SORI. Corey bringing a criminal offender record information and also a sex offender registry information. If they're clear, a badge comes out within seconds, badge is placed, and it locks them in real time, knowing that they're in the building. That helps us with if there's an emergency within the building, we can access that Raptor system, knowing that we had others besides students, staff, faculty in the building, that we had others in the building, whether it be contractors working on something and or parents and volunteers. And then on their way out, the same thing, they return the badge and then they, the Raptor system signs them out. If they are flagged, from a query, an unfavorable query or story, it would flag and, notify administrators, immediately that there's an issue at the front area, so they can address it at them. Saying that, other features that the Raptor system can also, be utilized for, it can track both tardiness and early dismissals. Throughout the district, they're releasing students only to approved guardians, so when we come up, it syncs with our Power School. So that information that's in Power School will be available also in the Raptor system, in real time. It can also track staff activity. When I say staff activity, not signing in of all staff, that's not the goal of, the Raptor system, but it's staff similar to somebody like me, who is from building to building to building. So you know that I'm in that building that day and I'm not here at central office. So again, if there's a large scale safety event that may have occurred, that we need to track who's been in the building and have accountability, of students, staff, and personnel, it would track that for us, that somebody was in there. The other request was for Alice Training Institute. We had this in the past. It's a 3-year contract. It's an e-learning blended learning that's on-demand learning that they would do on the computer on their time that we set aside, and then it's tracked through the district of who has completed and who has not, and it is graded on that. And then we combine that. Staff really enjoyed it when we had it, and we did not have it during COVID, and we like to see it come back. It really was a good blended model. And then the district-wide Alice trainer, which is myself, then after the e-learning is done, then we do the modules within each classroom and do training and drills separately. So they do the online and then have live time with me. Next slide. Our FTEs are staying the same. We have a full-time nurse in each school, 2 in Florence Sawyer, 1 in each building, and then 2 at the high school based on nurse-student ratio via the state guidelines.
I'd like to jump in here for just a moment, if you don't mind. If you compare the FY23 budget to the FY24 budget, you'll see that the change in FTE there is from 10.1 to 9.5. What it should have read last year was 10.5. We have a float nurse that was our COVID float nurse during the time of COVID. And then we also have a grant funded nurse. The float nurse was 1.0, grant funded was 0.6. It happened to be just about the same salaries. So just the dollar amount was never off in the budget, but that FTE staffing line was. The COVID float nurse is a position that we did not fill this year. So similar to the MRE kindergarten position, we took that wait and see approach if we need to fill that position. We never found ourselves in a place to where we needed to fill that position, which is why it's being reduced out of the budget. But that was one of the projections we had to make in the time of COVID, not knowing the certainties of what was going to happen there. So.
Okay, the next slide I think is Ross.
Yeah, no, oops, sorry about that. So again, what Superintendent Downing just spoke to, if we do that decrease of the FTE that he just mentioned, that's where our salaries are at. I am noticing, and as many probably are, the substitute nurses' salaries. So I'm assuming that we have a typo on our end in my department, so we're going to rectify that. I'm imagining that that is supposed to read 6181 and not with the 2 at the end, but I'm going to double check and we'll update that on the next iteration of the budget. The overall change to the larger picture of the budget doesn't change much, but I certainly want to make sure that that's accurate. Again, the difference in the contracted services line is largely in part due to the Alice training and the Raptor system that are going to be coming in place under Lisa's supervision and implementation coming this fall.
Any questions for health and safety?
I have a question, but if anybody else, I've asked quite a number of questions.
I love to hear your voice, Joe. Go right ahead.
I love this. This isn't really more of a budget question. It's more of a personal application. You're talking about the Raptor system. And if I understand it correctly, it's one of those systems like when you go to school, they give you like a sticker to put on your shirt, it's got your picture on it and what have you. All right. And I'm sure that, I've seen it at other schools years ago, and I'm sure that the technology has increased, but this is just a quick question I had when you mentioned about it would check for criminal offenses. But you said corporate. So I'm wondering, have you seen any, a demonstration of the Raptor system? All right, so when they do the criminal background check, is it a nationwide check or is it just relegated to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts?
So that was one of the questions that Suchi, that we asked, right? It was national, correct? Yes, it was national.
Thank you.
Chandra.
More Raptor. What have you planned on what happens if you get a positive result from a parent?
So that it would notify, the system can be set up so it notifies whoever we want it to notify, right? So it's gonna happen at the front desk area, where people would sign in now.
And we're intentionally vague about that because we don't share our safety protocols with the public for reasons that you don't want to share your safety protocols with the public. So yes, we have those.
I guess my question is, would you prohibit a parent from entering the building based off these results?
The protocols we're building would do that, yes.
And this seems to also be in the tech budget. Is it in there twice?
So the actual physical pieces of the Raptor system that are coming in, that would be the badge printing and some of that onboarding are under this budget. We're gonna have to work as a district with our IT department to do the implementation of what does that forward facing, and I don't want to speak about our safety systems, but then what does the back end work of our notifications look like? And there's gonna be implications for time spent and hardware potentially and those types of things moving forward.
Like we are ready for the next part here.
Thank you.
managed facilities.
I'd like to invite Mr. Rob Frieswick, our Director of Facilities. Rob has been making regular appearances here.
She's your family.
We'll
Keep it short, Rob.
avoid the long introduction. Mr. Frieswick.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, Superintendent Downing. Thank you, school committee. Thank you, community at large, for supporting the facilities department. Providing a safe learning environment for all the students here at Nashoba Regional. Facilities department connection to the strategic plan. A lot of what facilities does is, it's behind the scenes. It's not as forward facing, as some of the other departments, but is just as important. We strive to, provide a clean, safe learning environment for all students. A lot of compliance compliance, things that we have to contend with to make sure that the buildings are running as smooth as possible. Regulation changes, a lot of things from the Department of Labor Standards, OSHA, things like that. You'll see in the budget, some of the budget drivers, inspections and compliance has shot up a bit, and that's from some of these regulation changes and things like that. Schedule maintenance projects, those are projects that fall under that $10,000 cap that creates a capital project. Those are, in-house projects that we take on in-house. We work closely with pupil personnel service, providing spaces for students, that are vulnerable and, that have higher needs. One of the other strategic plans that we're going to be putting is the house doctor service RFP that we're putting up. And that's going to help us build that better 5-year, 10-year capital. Next slide. You can see the breakdown of the facilities department. It's broken down by town with the custodians in each of those towns. You do notice there's a reduction here in Bolton of 1 FTE. We have a long-term absence that we're not going to be filling. We've made some operational changes and picked up some efficiencies in doing so. So we're not going to backfill that position.
I would like to point out on this particular flow chart that your superintendent did a screenshot of this before I corrected my math. Lancaster custodians is 6 FTE, Bolton custodians is 6 FTE. So still 12, it's 6 and 6 instead of 7 and 5, so. I will be going to one of the math interventionists to get that corrected.
So I'm going to own this slide, although Rob was pretty instrumental with the information in our conversations with Superintendent Downing. So I'm going to go through this real quick because I recognize the hour of the evening. In the top, under the blue, we have our current situation with regards to heating oil. So the voted budget is at $287,000 with a projected use of 115,000 gallons. That is where we came in after bid on per gallon costs. So our projected cost for this year, if we use up all of our oil, would be approximately $516,000. We have the option, and we're going to pursue the option to be part of a collective bid for heating oil and potentially others as well, the other utilities. But this is the most pressing one because of the increase and the strain it's put on our current operating budget under facilities. So if all assumptions were the same with gallon usage and our current price projecting out the FY24, you see that the FY24 original project or projected cost would have been the same as what we would expect to spend this year. However, we have a mild winter happening right now, and that is currently helping us, and we're projecting that we may be able to carry over our purchase of the $115,000 or 115,000 gallon bid from this year into next year, which would reduce our gallon usage next year. And then also, and this is just a rough estimate right now, of an estimated FY24 per gallon through a collective bid. So we're probably going to be closer to 360,000, and that's what we're projecting at this point. Things may change because the estimated per gallon, and we don't 100% know when the collective bid will come back. But given the mild winter, given that we may have some savings, we're going to be at a potential better place than I think we were worried about when we first sat down to do facilities. Rob, just for edification. So I believe that the current collective bid that we're going to be into, although that will change, is currently at $2.90. Is that what they quoted us?
No, 350 or 370.
Okay. Yeah. All right, I thought it was much lower than that. Okay. Oh, that's what we paid last year.
Yes. Last year.
That's why that number is so important to me. So we're going to be able to have a smaller gallon bid next year and have a better price than what we're paying right now. So it's not necessarily, I want to call it a savings, but our projections get to decrease by that much because of this collective, and we're going to pursue other utilities through this collective. There's other pieces that we can pick up potentially in the future, but it's the French River Educational Center. They're a nonprofit, and a big part of what they do is some collective bidding. I've reached out to other districts that use them and done some vetting, and I think we're going to be in a good place.
Last year,
If I could just add a piece, I want to come back to a question that Mr. Haresh asked earlier. You asked a question about, do we look for efficiencies, cost savings, competitive bids, and things like this? This is a great example of that. Our team recognized that when we saw those escalating costs of fuel just go through the roof after the budget was passed, and we did our best to lock in where we could, because they even went higher than the $4.49 a gallon. I think it even tipped at $5. But we were able to lock in at the year for that at that point. We knew now we needed to do something. So the work and looking at these collectives, these collaborative agreements to get bulk pricing on oil, I think is an example of how we are looking at those things and those expenditures and pathways to try to reduce those rising, escalating costs.
I think we recognized this fall the vulnerability of a single bid entity. So in a volatile market. So having this option to be part of a collective bid in a volatile, potentially continue to be volatile market for utilities, I think suits us well relative to the utilities budget.
And that bid that through French River is written in such a way that is very, it protects us. So we have to give them a gallonage amount that we think we're going to use. We're going to use that 95,000. If we don't use that much, there's no penalty to the district. If we go over that, there's no penalty. We'll still be paying that lower price. Where now, if we were to go over that 115,000 gallon total, we would have to pay whatever market price would be. So, and French River last year, I believe, went out at 1.5 million gallons in their bid. So, you know, as you can imagine, that's quite a bit to go out for. So there's a big savings there.
So as we spoke to, I mean, here are the utility costs broken down, and you see the heating fuel. Well, Rob, I don't know, it does have I think something needs to be changed. So we do have an update to make there. However, you can see the other costs that have gone up relative to just the increases that we see. Again, we're going to try to look at other utilities relative to propane and electricity, relative to electricity. And Rob already did some work on our propane contract this year. So we're hoping that will continue into next year. So. Any questions?
Questions of the committee on facilities? Mike?
The slide about the heating oil, probably one of the most satisfying slides of the whole presentation. It's such a great find. I'm just, and you helped to clarify it, so I appreciate it, but I'm just curious, why did we have a projected use this year of 115,000, whereas next year we're back down to 95,000?
Because of the weather that we're having, we're not using as much oil as we typically do. We've been tracking our annual oil usage since 2018, and that is where we get the 115,000 gallon number. That's typically what we use.
So
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I didn't interrupt.
Because it's been so mild this winter that we're projecting, we're not going to use all that 150. Obviously, things will change. It's still very early.
So
But
115 is typical, 95 is the drop because of the mild weather.
correct.
Got it.
And Mr. Freezer, we're bound to that 115. We have to stay here until we purchase the entire one.
So that's going to probably get carried over. We're going to work with our current vendor, you know, going into next heating season until we exhaust that, and then we can start using the French River contract.
All right, everybody, let's move on to our next subject. Thank you, Mr. Freezer.
Yeah, I'd like to bring it back to National Care.
All right, food services.
So I do not pretend to be an expert in food services. However, I'm learning quite a bit. So Mr. Overcash put together his projected expenditures for next year, and you see that here. Regarding revenue and reimbursement, regarding reimbursement revenue and meal receipts, we did not make any changes. We are still not clear as to what the program will look like moving into our next school year for the reimbursement program that's happening right now for school meals. So we're not making any changes here. We'll know more. We also have a DESE representative coming in tomorrow as part of I don't want to call it an audit. The terms escaping me for what they do, but it's relative to the financials and the reimbursement information. So Mr. Overcash is meeting with them tomorrow. I'm part of that mid-afternoon. So if there's anything that becomes of that, I will update the committee. Are there any questions on food services?
Yeah, Mr. Overcash talked about that.
Correct.
DESE.
Yeah, we've had our procurement review, and now this is another one. So this is one I'm more interested in. Yeah.
Mike.
Mr. Mulcairn, I know you're not the expert.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask a question knowing that you may not have an answer. We are currently engaged in a free meal program that has carried over multiple years.
Yeah.
It's my understanding that there's a school lunch reimbursement that offsets services of lunch, but because these are free programs, is that considered lost revenue compared to FY?
Just back up to the beginning, because I thought you were saying one thing, and when you said lost revenue, I might have.
We have a free meal program.
Mm-hmm.
But my understanding is that the state issues a reimbursement for the service of food.
So we've had a long-standing free and reduced program that's been around prior to the pandemic. Middle of the pandemic, things changed. The federal government picked up the reimbursement for meals, and then now it's the state of Massachusetts that's doing it. Governor Baker put that into effect over the summer last year. I did ask Mr. Overcash this question as I'm trying to learn. The actual rates on what you get reimbursed for depends upon the type of meal and the type of student. So that's part of it as well, that I don't fully understand the nuance. But obviously, we have to meet certain nutrition criteria and those thresholds in order to get that full reimbursement, as well as the process of those reimbursements.
Got it. I mean, the process is a little bit unclear. I don't even know the value of that reimbursement, but,
Yeah.
I can probably follow up offline.
Okay.
But I wonder if you're asking if prior to these programs being instituted,
That was
if
considered revenue.
it was a revenue driver.
Well, there's the revenues to offset the expenditure.
Right.
So
You're spending, but you're also getting some back.
correct.
All
So
that
our
stuff.
reimbursement now is considered a revenue versus where students used to always build up that account, and then the parents would get an email that, hey, you owe this amount of money for school lunch, or they would prepay through the program. I think that's what you were asking originally, and I missed that. Sorry.
Yeah, Mr. Haresh, historically, if there were, say, over, if there were balances that were carried there, you have to spend in that arena.
Right.
So that's where school systems do things like purchase their cafeteria tables and other types of things that are general for the school.
Yeah.
I've seen out of food services budgets when there is a surplus balance.
Yeah. Right.
So this year we replaced, as an example to that, this year we replaced a failed dishwasher, which, for a resident doesn't sound like a big number, but for an industrial sized kitchen, it's significant. So having that reimbursement as revenue to help offset those costs as things come up, so they're not a charge to the district, is extremely helpful.
Sandra.
Just for clarification, what is the line item meal tax?
I'm not 100% sure. So Mr. Overcash put this together. So there may be a nuance with regards to the meals that we are charging for, but those are the a la carte menu items, those types of things, where there might be a meal tax on that. I'm not sure.
Second meal.
Second meals, those types of things.
But we wouldn't pass that on to whoever's paying for it?
I'm not sure, because if it's not part of the actual reimbursement as a point of sale place, we might have to push forward that as an expenditure. I can look into it further.
Looks like we are moving on to our next item, and that is extended learning.
Yep. So I met with Ms. Hannigan, who provided me with her budget totals. Minimal changes relative to costs and expenditures. Obviously, our salaries are our biggest driver within this budget as well. And then under the revenues, just some general projections, but again, we don't have a full enrollment registration yet. So once that's taken care of, we'll dive back in and make sure that our revenue is matching our expenditures, because again, extended learning is another one of those programs that's meant to be self-sustaining, and we're not carrying any costs in our operating budget for the extended learning program.
All right, moving on to our next topic, I believe, and that is athletics.
Athletics. So Ms. Rich has the benefit of being at the wrestling meet tonight. So I'll provide a quick update relative to athletics, and obviously I am no stand-in for Ms. Rich as a award-winning athletic director. So please be patient with me. So a major focus of Ms. Rich's budget is on the sustainment of our excellent teams, their success, and the positive impact on our school district. Relative to the strategic plan and our building our district-wide identity, Ms. Rich will continue to update our athletics with our new mascot through specific items such as signage, as you see here, and then also within our uniform replacement cycle. Relative to the budget, we have some increases for transportation and some coaching. I want to note that and this is exciting news, that the coaching increases are going to be due to adding 2 spring teams next year. We are going to add girls golf in the spring, as well as boys volleyball. So we're very excited about that. Any questions relative to the athletics budget?
I'm seeing none. although that is very exciting news.
It is exciting.
Fantastic.
It's exciting.
Thanks to Tanya for that.
Okay, relative to our system-wide budget, there's no major changes. You can see increases or decreases are based on interest payments or rate fluctuation on our debt schedules that are already preset. I do want to note, and you'll be able to see this a little bit, not only here under our expenditures, but also during revenues, that this year we're using a decreased number of daily routes buses as compared to last year. So that will carry over into FY24. So our actual cost versus the voted for this year is a decrease. And we're still waiting on some things like our charter school tuition as far as what that looks like for an actual cost. So you can see there's some minimal changes here. Under contracted services, that was really dropped that amount just based on a review of previous fiscal years and seeing what we were spending that on. Legal services came down a little bit. Our transportation, as I said, is going to be decreased based on the number of routes. However, we do have an increase in our rates per our contract. So the number of routes goes down, but the rates on each of those existing routes and remaining routes does go up. So those are our sort of major pieces. I do want to note, in case anybody's looking at the SPED assessment in the school choice tuition out assessment, I have moved that $20,877 estimate of our SPED assessment for school choice out students into the school choice tuition out assessment. We are getting sort of what's I would term as one bill on all of our school choice out assessments. So if a student has specialized services based on a special need on an IEP, we get assessed for that as well on top of the regular school choice tuition out charge. And maybe in the past it was separated out, but as those come in for those students as part of our regular billing, for lack of a better term, those are coupled together. So that increase of school choice tuition out assessment does incorporate the SPED assessment that, as far as we're aware right now, it's just being paid only out of one line and charged to one line.
Forgive me, you said tuition, school choice tuition out assessment is an increase?
No, it's not. So I took off the students that were graduating and then adding the students back in, but then also we don't know if those new students that may come in or may be kindergartners next year that live in the district and go to school. We don't know if they might have a need that might be met through an IEP for an additional charge. So it's really just taking the number of students that are exiting, looking at sort of how many students each year are going to school choice out and using that as a number for new students for kindergarten.
That's complicated. Thank you.
Not a perfect science, but again, it's trying to put some scrutiny to it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I see Maureen's hand. Go ahead, Maureen.
I was just wondering if the school choice was the legacy students that were doing school choice, but it sounds like this is inclusive of SPED too.
So these are students that are school choice out of our district. So if there's a student that lives in Bolton and they choose to school choice to maybe Hudson because their parent works there for whatever other reason, we are charged a rate on that student as a school choice out student. You are absolutely right with regards to our school choice in students, and that's reflected in revenue. And I can get to that in a little bit.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
All right. Moving on to our next section. Thank you for that, Ross.
Yep. So insurance and benefits, we are waiting for our following figures. I did use the high end of estimated increases based on my conversation with our representatives from the different insurance groups. Obviously, property, casualty, and auto rates are a big piece of it, as is our health insurance for active and retired employees and our dental insurance for active and retired employees. I believe we'll have an update on insurance and benefits at our February 15th school committee meeting. So again, you can see that these increases are on the high end for health insurance and dental. I hope that it's different, but this is where we want to project, as we want to be conservative in what we present today as a projected budget. Something like Worcester County Retirement, our obligation to that. We already know what it is. We were notified, and that reflects if we do our prepay of on July 1. So if we pay it all on July 1, that's our discounted prepay rate, not prepay, excuse me. If we pay on July 1, we get a discounted rate, and that's what we're expected, and that's what we have here.
All right, we're gonna move. Oh, Mike.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Yeah. Back to what you were saying, two questions. The Worcester County retirement, is that something where the rate has gone up and we've opted for a lower increased rate because we're prepaying? Is that what you mean?
We have the option to get a lower rate if we pay on July 1 versus spreading our payments out over the course of the year.
But from last year to this year,
correct,
the cost of that package has gone up.
Yeah, and I'm with certainty believing that our FY23 voted followed the same process.
Okay.
We confirmed the number, and we did make a payment this year for FY23 on July 1 for the entirety of our Worcester County retirement.
Okay, and then the similar question for the health insurance, is it the package itself that increased from 23 to 24?
That would be the district obligation of that 70% per the contracts.
So that was part of the previously negotiated contract, is that what you're saying?
Correct. So this would not change the condition that it is a 70% ownership of the district to pay for employee health insurance.
So both represent 70%? The FY23 and the FY24?
Correct. So I took the FY23 number, used the increase on the high end of what I had a conversation with our representatives from the insurance group, and used that number.
So that price itself went up? Yeah.
Projected to go up. How much, we don't know, but I did use a very conservative amount in order to project the budget today.
Thanks, Ross.
Yep.
I mean, I think that, one of the important notes is that benefits are expensive. And they're getting more expensive all the time.
Yeah.
I think too, that we have a lot of employees, I assume, who do not opt into that benefit package. And that can change on July 1. Don't you have like a window where employees can?
Correct, the open enrollment. Yep.
Can come in or out.
Yep.
And so I assume that you're using trends to kind of predict as best you can.
Yes, because I'm not sure we could necessarily do an accurate analysis of people going out and people coming into our system as employees about whether or not they are on X plan or Y plan, whether they're family or individual. So we're using what was our voted budget this year on FY23 and applying that increase and moving forward from there. So there's some conditions that stay the same in that projected change, but we don't. You're right. There's some variability that comes in after the fact based on people who either may come off of our plans or come onto our plans.
All right, great. Yeah, so looking at the clock here, I see that it's 9 o'clock. It's our practice to poll the committee and ask you guys if you're okay continuing to go ahead. At this point, we're moving toward the revenue side of the PowerPoint, which is the fun part, but guys, can you give me a thumbs up if you are okay kind of hanging in there and staying with this for a little bit longer? Thumbs up if you're okay with it. All right, we have consensus on that. If somebody is struggling to remain because of some sort of commitment, I get it. You can just shoot me a message and that's no problem. As long as we keep a quorum, which I'm sure we will. So let's move on to the revenue part of the slideshow.
Okay, so projecting preliminary revenues, we do believe that we are going to have an increase in our Medicaid revenue based on my conversations with Mrs. DeAngelis, what we're seeing for services and what is applicable to get Medicaid revenue. We believe that we'll have an increase. Also, we're looking at investment income and speaking with our district treasurer, Vicki Chartier. We are looking at an investment income increase. So that's on our accounts that are interest bearing. As you know, some rates are going up and that may benefit us. We do not know our minimal local contributions, our Chapter 70, or necessarily what our regional transportation reimbursement will be at this point. I'll talk about a little bit about this, but we'll know more about foundation enrollment and those things hopefully around the beginning of February to then bring forward to the committee about how that's impacting the budget. Just again, a piece on the regional transportation. Our reimbursement next year will be based on this year's expenditures, and we're spending less because we have less routes. What we actually are allowed to claim, and then what the actual reimbursement will be. What we claim based on how far away students live from the school they attend should stay rather static. It will be what the actual reimbursement is from the state, which is still sort of a moving target. But again, the decrease on the reimbursement is mostly due to the fact that we have less buses operating this year and can claim less cost for reimbursement next year. So here's a preliminary review of our revenues for next year. I want to point out that the highlighted information up in orange is going to be updated when we find out more about foundation enrollment in Chapter 70 coming hopefully at the beginning of February, and then we can update the committee from there. Again, that is driven by the state. We don't have that input. You'll see on future slides, the assessments are obviously, and I know that Superintendent Downing based a large part of the presentation last year on how the enrollment worked and how that impacted the local assessments to each town. So obviously, these numbers are speculative at this point. We don't have what like minimal local contribution would be in order to have the foundation enrollment.
I'm going to take this opportunity to signal to the community and to all of our town government officials. We have a change in governor this year, and with the change in governor, there's an extended 30-day period for departments to submit their budgets to the governor. Therefore, the N1 that we traditionally get, the last 2 years, it's been January 26th and 27th, could be extended up to 30 days. So that is going to put us in a crunch because we are bound to produce a budget by a budget hearing by March 15th. So we're going to continue to do that. This is what happens when you turn over a governorship. And so, hopes and dreams, crossing our fingers that for our joint finance and advisory meeting, we have those numbers for that meeting because that's a very important meeting just prior to our budget hearing. So we're kind of hand wringing over here because that N1 is critical to us understanding the total composite of the budget. So I'm just asking everybody's patience out there right now that what we're giving you is to help you understand where we are at this moment, but there may be some delay over the past compared to recent years based upon the change in governor.
Okay. So some unresolved budget factors, sort of just in summary, we are under, we'll be under a new contract for Unit A and Unit C. Again, I mentioned the insurance and benefits. Talked a little bit about the charter and school choice assessments. We'll confirm numbers with state, hopefully, and then obviously the Chapter 70 and foundation enrollment, and we'll update that enrollment for the assessment. Just as a lens into Chapter 70 real quick, this is how our Chapter 70 has increased over time. Again, our estimate is not changing based on last year. We're leaving it where it is. So potential Chapter 70 scenarios as they play out. If our Chapter 70 funding stayed the same, we obviously have a zero additional revenue to offset assessment. If it's at 2% or 4%, you can see the increases here. Essentially, every time we move up 1% on our current Chapter 70 funding, we gain about $90,000 in revenue to the district. So again, this is why it's so critical for us to have that number from the state as we move to finalize our budget.
I'll take this moment to also say that in state statute, Chapter 70 must increase by $30 per student. You cannot go down in Chapter 70 funding. So while we show what a zero is here, we have approximately 3,000 students in the district at $30 per student. We should expect to see a minimum of $90,000 increase in Chapter 70 funds according to state statute. But we'll understand more from there. We know receipts were robust this year at the state as people around the state got reimbursement checks. So we're going to see what happens with the new governor's budget and how public education is funded there.
And just as a quick interlude here, to clarify, the budget hearing is on March 1st.
March 1st.
And we will deliberate as a committee about Kirk's, very best final version of this budget on March 1st to then vote on March 15th, because we are obligated to send our voted budget to the towns by that day. So just a little timeline note there.
And Madam Chair, just in preparation for this committee, in the event that there are some delays in the governor producing the budget and us receiving the N1 with all of the required information we need, I may come back to this committee and request that we have that meeting on March 8th. We just don't know until we start to get a forecast from the governor's office.
Joe, correct me if I'm wrong. What is the requirement on the budget hearing and doesn't there have to be a certain window of time between the budget hearing and the vote? Is it, or does it not matter?
Oh, in terms of the school committee?
I don't think there's any requirement that, I'm not aware of any requirement that would preclude us from voting that night. I mean.
But to have the hearing.
We have a hearing, but we could, I don't believe there's anything that precludes us from going after, to close the public hearing, going into debate, and then actually approving the budget at that time. I think that as a matter of course and practice, we let it ferment for a week or two before we decide what we're going to do on it.
Okay.
And just, again, informational slide on historical use of excess and deficiency as a revenue source. So their previous voted budgets are here, and you can see how this has been used over time and certainly the last few years. Again, we did not change that as a revenue source. We left it the same. And Superintendent Downey is going to cover foundation enrollment.
Thank you. I just want to remind the committee, as I spoke to you last meeting on foundation enrollment, that the variance that we'd see from the district's assessment to ultimately what appears on the N1, that moving forward for the consistency in all parties involved, the enrollment numbers on the N1 will be the enrollment numbers we use to calculate the 5-year rolling average. With knowing right now, we have to use that projected number that we collect from our data source.
And then here's our high school enrollment for capital assessment. This would not change for foundation enrollment, correct, Kirk?
Correct. Okay. That's that's actual heads that walk through the door.
Correct. Okay, so where does this place us all as far as assessment goes? Again, I want to make sure I really call out that our minimal local contribution numbers are FY23 numbers. We do not have updates on those. Some of those revenue, potential changes to revenue and how that would impact, whether it's through Chapter 70 or or through how assessments may be impacted is not here. But what we do have is, as of today, using some information from previous year and obviously the conditions of the regional agreement with regards to enrollment. This is where we are at today in looking at our overall budget and the assessment for FY24.
So to bring some context to that, if you all recall the budget workshop last year, when we did the first run of the budget, those percentage increases were in the double digits. So again, it just shows the thoroughness of which the team went through the budget this year to look for the efficiencies while delivering the educational plan that we've outlined for you that is cited within our strategic plan. And I think at that point we can ask questions.
So any questions about the revenue slides?
Just a quick question.
Go for it, Joe.
Just for my own edification, what's our percentage of E&D comparison to the overall budget? What are we at right now?
So as far as,
well, we can maintain up to 5%.
Correct.
Of that 5%, where do we stand percentage-wise of that 5%? Usually around 1% of them.
well, so if it's 1.2, well, we don't have an update on our certification, so I don't want to go ahead and speak.
It's speaking with general terms, where are we generally?
So yes, I think that's accurate. Given the hour, I'd want to just double check my math. But yes, we do not max out our,
I know that. Yeah.
Our E&D at the 5%. That's correct.
Yeah, we tend to hover near the 2% line.
Right, that was that. Like
Usage.
What's that?
In terms of usage of E&D, and then like this past year, we certified at 1.24 million and we used 1.2.
Okay, no, the only reason I asked is I know it affects our bond rating, so I was just wondering where we were.
That's right, it does. And that's gonna be, that bond rating is gonna be very important, particularly when we borrow on the new high
That's
school.
why I asked.
So exhausting the ND to its bottom levels is not an effective strategy if we want to get the best pricing for the potential high school.
Any other questions on revenue? Mike?
Yes, I do.
Go for it.
Just to be clear, all of the numbers prior to the revenue were pre-offsets, right? So we had a transportation cost, but those numbers, I think that was on slide, I think it was in the.
Correct. In some places, right, in some places, we include the offset such as in the PPS budget regarding out of district placements. We already built in the offset, expected offset of circuit breaker. The actual bill that comes due on transportation in district through our bus contractor is represented as the actual cost, and then the revenue of the reimbursement is represented here.
John Doerr.
So 100 slides back, in the food service section, it looked like revenue far exceeded expenses, like to the tune of almost $370,000. Is there a reason why we're not seeing that showing up here as revenue?
So I think there's some certain legal parameters on that, and I want to dig deeper into it about why we wouldn't move. I think what you're saying is there the option to move excess revenue from food services that's not being used as expenditure into the operating budget as an offset. I can look into that.
What's important though is that that revenue has to be spent in that category, that area. Now, that's not to say that if there was a purchase that is connected to that source, it couldn't offset maybe, one of the projects or something that was being a facilities line, for instance. But it can't just, it's not just revenue you can just dump into the budget.
And any kind of, does this trigger the requirement that you go through the school committee to move money from one part of the budget?
No, because it stays within that revolving account of food services.
Okay. Any other questions just about revenue, guys? Because we are going to move on to a section that is about general questions before we adjourn. Any other revenue questions? I'm noticing that there is some change in enrollment, that our enrollment is like basically set. Would you guys argue, you did a really great job last year giving us extensive detail about enrollment. What I'm noticing is that enrollment is projected as relatively steady. Is that true?
And that's why it's based off of the N1 document.
Okay. And it's a 5-year rolling average,
Yeah.
so it's.
So if minimum local contribution is based off of the enrollment numbers in the N1 document, how we do the fixed assessment should be based off of those same numbers, because we had some debate about that last year, if you recall, and said, we need to be thinking about this for consistency purposes moving forward.
All right, great. So I'd like to open the floor for kind of final questions that are perhaps,
And I want you to remember, these enrollment numbers are foundation enrollment numbers, not solely just bodies that walk through our doors. It's because we carry a fiscal liability for those students in other locations as well. So that's why the numbers won't look exactly like what our enrollment numbers look like in terms of attendance at school.
right, good point. So let's open it up for more general overarching questions if there are any. I think Mike might have tabled one of his questions at the beginning, and is it still relevant?
Well, I have lots of questions, but that particular question was answered at Joe's section.
So do you have any other questions that we should inquire? Seeing no hands, except Mike's. Let's go to Mike.
So the budget was built around trying to find efficiencies while still trying to maintain a pretty robust academic program. I very much appreciate that. We found a lot of efficiencies by reducing FTEs, and we took that cash and we allowed for, and if I'm mischaracterizing, just let me know, we allowed for the development of new administrative positions. That more or less,
No,
okay,
no, that's not it at all.
okay,
We actually reduced if this budget were to be voted, the administrative positions would be reduced by 1.2 FTE. Because we reduced the assistant principal in Lancaster, the assistant principal at Hale, and then that 0.4 increase for digital learning and innovation.
and that's budget neutral. That increase, right, that was budget neutral.
It's actually decreased. It's a negative 1.2 because we're dropping 1.6 and adding 0.4 back in.
Okay, so I guess my overall question stands. When we find these efficiencies and we put them all together in a pot, what drives how we decide to use those found efficiencies, right? I mean, we could use them in a lot of different ways. We can build programs, we can invest in teaching and learning, we can fund new positions, curriculum, OPEM. How do we make decisions on what it is that we spend that money on?
Well, as we looked at the FTE this year and how we built up the FTE, we took it really based from an approach of going all the way back to the standards, looking at administrative guidance and class size ratios, right? And you build that up just from where it is based upon those standards of practice, right? And in doing that math, that's where those reductions of FTE were found. I want a slight tangent here. I want to reassure the community, but particularly our teachers, those reduction in FTEs, we do not anticipate that being equated to teachers losing their jobs. Teachers are not losing their jobs because as we look at, expected retirements, licensure application, we may need to do some adjustments, but it's not putting positions, programs, or courses at risk. I want to be clear about that. So as we build those things up, we say, okay, well, let's look at our standards and where we've had some areas where we fit within the enrollment standards, like this is, say, for instance, at Hale and MRE, as we cited earlier. We then have those positions and we say, okay, well, this is what we need. So what you're getting right now is really a level service budget with a redefinition of that literacy coach, math coach piece, and the exception of one reduction of the technology leader, the system-wide technology teacher. So this budget is just slightly, it's less in a level service budget than last year. So to equate it out, it all breaks down to a reduction, according to what you all saw today, in 1.2 FTE in administration, a reduction in 3.3 Unit A FTE, and a reduction of 2.6 Unit C positions in those school-based budgets. I'm separating out special education again, because special education is pertinent to the specific needs of specific students for specific things.
And what amount, or rather, what accounts for the 6.41% increase is just the cost of doing business with the same exact things we largely had last year.
Correct.
It seems to me that to answer my question, you don't find the efficiencies first and then decide where to spend the money. It seems to me that you have something that you want to accomplish, then you go look for an efficiency and then move things around.
That's right. We have a strategic plan. So we have a vision of what we want to do. So we look to the strategic plan first. The strategic plan is our mandate. That is those are our walking orders from this committee as representative of our three communities to say, you need to go execute this plan. And so this budget reflects our initial steps in doing just that. And we're doing it in an incredibly thorough way that is scrutinizing all the elements of the budget so that we are being the most fiscally responsible to the taxpayers as we can possibly be.
All right, everybody, I am seeing that there are no golden hands in the air. And it is definitely a little bit later than we like to keep you. So if there's nothing further, last call. I will accept a motion to adjourn.
So
Second the motion.
All right, Joe seconds it. We're gonna do a roll call vote for all those in favor. So I'm gonna start online. Amy Vessels.
Yes.
Aaron.
Yes.
Aaron.
Yes.
Maureen.
Yes.
Brett.
Yes.
And I'll start up here myself. Yes. Mike.
yes.
Joe.
Yes.
And Shondor.
Yes.
We are adjourned, everyone, at 9:23. Thank you so much.